Okay.
They're coming up.
I'd like to call to order the July 25th, 2012 meeting of the Milton School Committee. As is our custom, I invite you to rise with us and salute the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First order of business is this evening's agenda. Couple of notes first under the superintendent's report in item 5. In item 5, sub-items B and C, the 2013 enrollment in STEM Grade 1 English pilot, we're going to take off the agenda tonight. The superintendent will refer to them briefly in her report, but we are not going to act on those or discuss those this evening. Is there anything else that needs to be added to tonight's agenda or deleted? Mr. Walker?
Two things, Mr. Chair. One is that we had intended to include approval of the social networking policy. And the second is outside labor council RFP.
All right, so between 7 and 8, we'll put in the policy subcommittee for the purposes of voting the social network policy. And the RFP, can we put that under old business?
Sure.
Because we have discussed it at least once in the past. Anything else to come on or off of this evening's agenda? Okay, then we'll declare the agenda approved. Now, next item on the agenda is Citizen Speak, which Citizen Speak is limited to 3 minutes a person, and we have 15 minutes by policy, and I have far more people than that who wish to speak. I can extend under our policy Citizen Speak up to 30 minutes. And we do have a second Citizen Speak at the end of our agenda. I would just say, in fairness to people who want to speak, we are not taking any votes this evening on the issue that I'm sure almost everybody is here to talk about, which has to do with the first grade enrollment policies. What we're here for tonight is to get a presentation on analysis of some of the data that people have been asking for and some of the information that we can glean about performance in the first grade French versus English programs throughout elementary school. So if you feel that you absolutely must speak before we take a vote, there's plenty of opportunity because we're not voting tonight. All right. The only vote that has been taken by the school committee up until now, and I've been getting letters about, well, you're doing this and it's not quite right. The only vote we have taken is if someone moves into Milton this summer with a first grader, that first grader may not go into French this fall. That is the literally only vote we have taken on the subject of first grade enrollment up to this point. What we are looking at now is trying to figure out, should the situation that occurred this summer repeat itself, what do we do about it? And this is the start of that discussion tonight. So we will take people in the order that they've signed up. We will, I ask you if you, when I call your name, if you wish to defer till the later Citizen Speak, just say so. If you wish to put it off till another meeting, just say so. But I'll go through the list in order. I ask people to give their name and address as they start, because that's a policy for Citizen Speak. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. We will give up to 30 minutes for people to express their opinion. This is not an open hearing yet. This is just Citizen Speak for people to be heard on issues. So we'll have a Citizen Speak session now. So the first person who signed up is James Mulligan.
Defer until later tonight.
Next is Tara McCarthy.
I can defer.
The next is Jay Fundling. If you come up here to the table, please, when you speak, that way the people at home can hear too.
Right here?
Please.
Excellent. Hello, I'm Jay Fundling. I'm at 39 Sias Lane in Milton, and I am here to speak about the French immersion issue. I've been trying to read up on it, reading articles, and I've actually got a couple of points that I'd like to throw out there just for people to think about tonight. One is that, as I understand it, a study was done in 2010, and then there were just there's a report for the study, and then there were decisions made about the study, and just as an outside observer, it seems to me that there were decisions made 2 years ago right after the study, and now we may be on the verge of making a different decision now, and I'm not sure why we're making this decision. A few things have confused me in particular. One is that I've been reading in the news, there's a quote that I've read several places that says, in 2010, a committee concluded that capping the program would be necessary if enrollment trends continued. Well, I've been very confused by this statement because I'm not sure if it's talking about the school committee or the World Language Committee, which did this report 2 years ago. If it's the school committee, I couldn't find it in the school committee minutes. If it's the World Language Committee, I looked at the World Language Committee report, which I have several copies here if anyone left theirs at home, and I can't find it anywhere in that report either. I did see, of course, there was discussion about the possibility of capping French immersion, but that was presented as an option, not a recommendation or not a requirement. There's also discussion of what happens if French immersion population goes up, but that just said, oh, these things may happen. I didn't see anywhere in the report that there would be a required cap later. So if that is an issue, I would like anyone to point out to me where in this report it said there should be an automatic cap if French enrollment goes up. And the other thing I'd like to discuss is that I keep seeing that, French immersion has gone from 44% in 2007 to 66% in 2012. And that sounded very dramatic to me, like a big increase. Then I started looking closer at the data that was presented here on May 23rd, and I only had those 6 years of data. And what I saw was that in 2007, the percentage was quite low, it was 44%. And then we had 4 years of very flat data, it was in the 50s. And then we had 1 year of very flat enrollment. Then we had 1 year of very high enrollment, which was this year. So to me, that says we've got sort of a flat trend here with one outlier being low 6 years ago, one outlier being high this year. And I would certainly hate us to overreact and say, we've got this one high out, we've got a couple of outliers, and let's react. But I'd rather look and see, is this really going to be an issue or not? So I'll yield the rest of my time.
Thank you very much. Next is Linda Cooper.
Good evening. Thank you. Linda Cooper, 47 Rose Street. I've come here tonight to ask the school committee to support the superintendent of schools' recommendation and make a swift decision to implement the cap for the French immersion program effective immediately so that parents can make an informed decision for the 2013 and 2014 school year. First and foremost, Milton has an obligation to educate all children in grades 1 through 12. It is not required to provide a French immersion program, as if it were, there would be an additional 349 school districts in Massachusetts offering it as well. This is a nice-to-have program, but parents need to understand that it is a privilege and not a right. What the school committee and superintendent respectfully failed to realize is that waiting and letting this issue linger is what angers parents and jeopardizes the sustainability of both the English and French programs. There is a lot of speculation and misinformation about each program, and that's never a good thing. The perception is that English is somehow deficient and that enrolling a child in French program assures a parent a tuition-free private education, free of children with additional education needs and a more rigorous academic experience. It is your duty to either market the English program better or enhance the program to effectively compete with the French. I have a unique perspective on this situation. I have a 4th grader in English, and I have a 2nd grader in French, and a 4-year-old ready to enter the school system soon. If my 4-year-old was not chosen for the French program, I know, because I live it, that she would flourish just as well in the Spanish and English program. There is no resentment from my 4th grader because he could not participate in the program due to a transferring in from another school. It is quite the opposite, in fact. My second grader could not wait to the day she gets into third grade and English is integrated back into her day. Others need to know this as well. As I read the Milton Times, it is sad to see parents so angered that their children may not get into the French program, that they find being a peer role model is an undue burden, or that they will move heaven and earth to get the French program. My son and daughter were role models in the Milton Integrated Preschool, and I can attest that a lot can be learned in both roles and has benefits for both the peer role model as well as the child needing additional assistance. I only wish these parents and all parents would use this passion for the betterment and sustainability of the whole school system. In addition, I would urge the school committee to reinstate the second first grade English class at the Cunningham School. My fear is that once the integration of the first grade classes occur, that having one large school to serve all children in both the Cunningham and Collycott districts will be the next step. This would be the worst outcome than having a cap on French enrollment. Will your decision implementing the cap be upsetting to some? Yes, absolutely. But it will also show your commitment to all students of the town and show the value of both programs equally. Once the cap is in place, parents can make a choice for their children. They will know the rules and can make informed decisions. Lastly, I would ask that if you consider the lottery for the French, that the lottery have no sibling provision or only child provision, and that all children have the same chance of getting picked. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Stephen Howard. Next is Jennifer Renz.
Thank you. My name is Jennifer Renz, and my husband Justin and I reside at 48 Walnut Street. We're the parents of 3 children, twins that will be entering second grade English at Glover in August, and an incoming first grade English student who is slated to enter the co-taught class as a role model student at Glover. I say slated because my husband and I have yet to decide whether or not my youngest son should enter a classroom that we feel is not presently educationally sound. During the school committee meeting of June 27th this year, as the discussion concerning adding an additional kindergarten class and request for program data evolved, a few school committee members openly asked what the up-to-date assignment policy is that the school committee and administration follow when placing elementary students in grades K to 5. An up-to-date statement of the elementary school assignment policy, inclusive of K to 5, as of 1 hour ago, is still not available on the website. The PDF document posted reflects the 2007 policy. Subsequent revisions that the school committee has voted on and approved from 2007 through 2012 are not available to residents. During the past 5 years, revision to the elementary assignment policy has occurred. In addition, the 2010 World Language Committee, which studied assignment policy and not program curriculum, made assignment recommendations that have not been fully heeded. And as a result, the elementary assignment environment is at the crisis point. For the 5th year in a row across all schools, enrollment in French has outpaced enrollment in English. This year's first grade assignment process saw the reduction of an English class in Cunningham, while 2 auxiliary French immersion classes were created at Cunningham and Glover. This is the same year that English classes in those 2 schools were targeted to be eliminated. Presently at Cunningham, there will only be 1 incoming first grade English class. This administration has decided that to fix this problem, the first grade students will merge with the Collycott first grade English program. This means that Cunningham will not have a standalone English program for those incoming first graders for the remainder of their elementary education. Some may argue that merging the English first grade programs between the 2 schools is not a big deal, because educationally it will not do any harm to the students. I agree, but we need to look at other aspects of this merger. Every year that this first grade class moves to the next grade, Cunningham English teachers at each grade will either be displaced to another grade or will lose their positions. This helps to continue to shrink the English program and hinder teachers' abilities to become experts at grade level instruction. Each year, the teachers will have to worry if they have a job or not, because there aren't enough children learning in English at Cunningham. Cunningham, for 3 years in a row, is hosting the additional auxiliary French immersion class. It will also possibly house the additional kindergarten class this year. Knowing that no standalone first grade English program exists in Cunningham makes Cunningham not a neighborhood school anymore, but a school based on program. This materially changes the design of the programs in each of the 4 elementary schools that was mutually determined by the administration and the school committee. This issue was foreshadowed by the World Language Committee report in 2010. Presently, at the Glover School, there will be 2 very small first grade English classes. I believe the numbers are 11 and 14. But there will be 3 full French immersion classes housing 26 students in each classroom without a classroom aide. This means that over 75% of the incoming first grade students at the Glover School are in the French program. More concerning than this is the gender issue in the Glover first grade. Out of the 25 children in the English program, there are only 5 girls. Since this administration does not want a same-sex class, these 5 girls are going to be split between 2 classes. Glover School has to have 2 English classes because they will have a co-taught class. During the citizen...
I've given you a little extra time. Can you sum up and maybe give that to us in writing so we can read it? I want to we try to keep to our 3 minutes. I've given you a little
Sure,
over
but
4 so
can
far.
I address the Glover issue, please?
If you could
Thank you.
do it quickly.
During the citizen speak portion of the school committee meeting on June 27, 2012, Mrs. Bradshaw spoke up because her daughter is in the co-taught class, and there will only be 2 female role models for her daughter in that class. There are over 315 first grade children in the district, and only 2 female role model girls are available for this class. That is horrendous. Since there are only 5 girls total in the English program at Glover and only 20 boys, there are very few role models for the co-taught class because not every student is appropriate to be a role model. This may mean that the same girls and boys will need to be role models for many years. Co-taught classrooms should be equitably balanced first, before all other enrollment takes place within the English and French immersion classes. Along with being educationally sound and innovative, the co-taught program saves the Milton Public School money, as those children requiring services are not placed out of district. We need to support our children in the co-taught program. What seems to have been lost in the recent press and biased media accounts is the moral and legal obligation of this school system to educate children in English. The French immersion program has evolved to where it is no longer perceived as an elective, but rather a right. This elitist attitude has no place in the Milton Public Schools, and it needs to be addressed immediately. Thank you.
Next is Stephen Minsky.
Good evening.
Evening.
Stephen Minsky, 702 Brush Hill Road. Just 4 quick points. The first is, it seems from a demand, the way that this issue of the French immersion program is being pictured is about solving a quality problem or a demand problem, which a cap doesn't seem to be the appropriate resolution for the problems. If you have a quality problem, fix the quality. From a demand standpoint, it seems if the residents that fund the school and are producing the reason why education exists in the community, why cut a popular program that residents want or cap a resident program? If your demand is increasing, meet the demand. My third point is really around planning as well. A lot of families choose Milton, as it was, I think, rated number 2 in the country, and recognized for the French immersion program. It attracts people to move to this community, pay taxes in this community, for that very reason. If there's going to be a change, the planning horizon should be out at least 2 years. As everybody knows, what happens as your policy is, you take somebody in kindergarten, it gets you a first-year slot. It's the same thing with private school and other options. If you're not getting your child into kindergarten, you're potentially forfeiting an opportunity to get into the first grade slot. And that's a decision that really is causing a large amount of stress unnecessarily. If you're going to create a program and you're going to make changes, the time horizon has got to give at least a minimum of 2, if not 3 years, for current residents that have made that decision to come here to be able to make alternative arrangements for their family, for their children.
Thank you very much. Next on the list was Peter Culhane, but you indicated you wanted to wait till the end of the meeting. Yes. Okay. Next would be Bruce Weinstein.
Good evening, thank you. I'm Bruce Weinstein from 16 Augusta Road. Just a few brief points. This is obviously a very difficult issue, and what makes it such a difficult issue is because ultimately we all care about the best for our children. Those, my sense is, whose children are in the English program feel very much assaulted by this decision, by a sense that the class sizes are becoming smaller, that the co-taught classes are becoming no longer feasible, and clearly that's not an acceptable outcome. By the same token, you have, at least in 2012, 2/3 of the population of this town, with children going into first grade, desiring a French program for which they have paid substantially with their taxes over the years to make sure that this and the entire school system would remain intact. I moved to this town nearly 15 years ago with the hope that someday my children would be able to be in the French program, because I think it's a unique and remarkable program, not to get my children into private school, but because I think it's a unique and private special program that makes this town special. As has already been pointed out, one of the important reasons that this town is ranked where it is nationally. When I sat down 2 years ago preparing to put my daughter into the French program, what was interesting to me was the conversation was primarily about which students didn't belong in the French program. The conversation was never about why should you go into the English program. And I think that's an important issue here. I think the school system as a whole has forgotten the English program in certain respects. I don't think the answer here is to tell people that if they want their children to learn French in a program that is a superb program, they can't do that. I think the answer is to find a way to make the English program desirable. Those people who have an experience with that English program obviously speak highly of it, and it's wonderful to hear that. That's not a word that gets out to the rest of the people in this town. Most people in this town hear about the French program. I think it's time to find a way to make the English program unique. Hopefully, in 2013, you won't see the same numbers issue that you saw in 2012. Perhaps the numbers will dip again, as we saw on the graph. If not, obviously there's some difficult decisions to be made, but those decisions don't really create a viable long-term solution. It seems to me the viable long-term solution here is to find some way to make the English program as special and as important in the minds of the people in this town as the French program is. And I hope that the committee can think creatively about finding some ways to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next would be Chuck Karimikas.
Hi, Chuck Karimikas, 16 Foster Lane. I very briefly agree with a lot of sentiments here tonight. This is not a scientific study, but I took 10 minutes out of my lunch hour today and surfed around the web and went to a few websites. So this is the Holliston website that is the only other school system in the Commonwealth that offers a French immersion program. Our Placentino Elementary School is unique in that it offers 3 programs: traditional French and French immersion and Montessori. All 3 programs implement the Holliston School curriculum. Space in our French immersion and Montessori program are limited to class size. A lottery may be needed to be held if interest exceeds capacity. I went to Montgomery County, Maryland, which evidently has a immersion program. Local school lottery. Admission in the foreign language immersion program is limited. Selection for the programs is based on a lottery system for students in kindergarten and grade 1, if requests exceed available program capacity. Admission for all other grades is determined by lottery, language proficiency, and available space. That was in Montgomery County. And in Vancouver, Washington, they have a Mandarin Chinese immersion program, which is quite interesting. The application process. Interested families must complete and submit an application for their child. Applications for kindergarten for the 2012-2013 school year will be available at the Franklin Elementary School and online starting on April 10th, 2012. Applications must be submitted to Franklin Elementary School no later than 3 p.m. on the 11th, 2012, to be entered into the lottery drawing. If there are more applicants than spaces in the program, students will be selected through the lottery process. So this is not a not scientific study. I saw other in Austin, Texas, and Anchorage, Alaska, but it seems to me that this isn't really controversial. When there are immersion programs in various school systems, there's a limit of seats. If too many people want the program and it exceeds the seats, you have a lottery process. I think I agree with both some of the pro-French speakers and pro-traditional speakers in that that's kind of the stick is the cap, and I think what we need to work on is a little bit more of the carrot, and I think maybe some things on the agenda will address that, but let's market the English program better, and maybe even add some curriculum that's available only to English. And I think if you do that, and then you have the cap in the background, chances are there won't be much controversy because the programs will both thrive at reasonable levels. Thanks.
Thank you. Next is Catherine Murphy. Next then would be Brian Bunn. Then Jane Gannon.
Should I go get that paper up there that I see your names on?
Yeah, there's only one more after Jane. Yeah, go ahead.
My name's Jane Gannon. I live at 67 Martin Road, and I have more of a question that I know can't be answered tonight, but I would like an answer to it, hopefully soon. I have a child entering the 3rd grade English program at Cunningham and a child who attended kindergarten at Cunningham School and is entering the 1st grade English program. I have an email back from June 12th from Superintendent Gormley, who was working to possibly get a 2nd English class added at Cunningham, that says that we would have an update on the process by Monday, June 18th. School is about a month away, and I still don't know where my child will go to school. If I'll have my children both at Cunningham or a child at Cunningham and Collycott School. And I think that I deserve an answer to that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gormley, you'll
I'll take
answer
care of it.
afterwards. Mary Ann Roll.
Hi, my name is Mary Ann Rull, and I live at 58 Buckingham Road. In recent years, the percentage of students enrolled in the French immersion program has increased to a point of imbalance. For the upcoming grade 1 class, almost 2/3 of the students have selected French. For many years, the balance had been teetering on a 50-50 split. Many families had questioned why Milton offers French as the immersion language instead of a more marketable language like Chinese or Spanish. In recent years, however, due to misconceptions about the strength of the English program and budget cuts, many parents have opted for French immersion. The English program in the Milton Public Schools is very strong. However, it seems that many are hesitant to discuss this. The decision between French immersion and the traditional English program has developed to a choice against a program instead of a choice in favor of a program. The greatest issue facing our schools is the budget. Budget cuts in recent years have reduced the number of teachers across the district. This is particularly an issue at the elementary level. The continual reductions in the budget have required the school administration and school committee to make cuts to eliminate teachers, reduce the weekly offering of Spanish, and decrease the hours of the kindergarten aides, among other cuts. It is impossible to discuss the imbalance of French or English selection without reviewing the budget cuts. In preparation for the 2013 budget this past January, among other cuts proposed, 2 reductions were recommended to eliminate teachers in the English program. A 2nd grade teacher at the Cunningham School and a 4th grade teacher at the Glover School. The plan was to combine classes in each school, one second grade at Cunningham from the 2 first grades, and 1 fourth grade at Glover from the 2 third grades, and distribute the remaining students throughout the district. These cuts were seen as too disruptive, so other cuts were selected. When the families of the kindergarten students made their selection a few months later in April, across the district, 66% selected French and only 34% selected English. This was a clear decision against the English program. There are no easy answers of how to right this imbalance. The parents of the students of the Milton Public Schools need to demand that the budget is fully funded, or we will continue to see an imbalance in our program choice and a decline in the quality of the education available to all the children. We need to have a shift in philosophy and start thinking that it is essential that our schools are funded properly, instead of accepting the annual reductions in teachers because of flat budgets. The current discussions of capping the French classes would only be a temporary fix to this issue if the budgets remained insufficient. The value placed on education in supporting our schools should set Milton apart from its neighboring towns. Hopefully, by properly funding the schools, parents will be able to make a decision for the program that is right for their child and not select against a program. Thank you.
Thank you. We have hit the end of our 30 minutes for citizen speak, but I actually have only, because of people who passed, only 2 names left on the list. So if there's no objection from the school committee, I'll offer those 2 people a chance to speak, as I've offered everyone else up to this point. And then I will apologize because I can't read this first name. Pat McNaught?
Good evening. I live at 14 Herrick Drive, and I was a member of the school committee when we implemented French immersion. So I would like to give a historical perspective on it. We had overcrowding in some schools, and we needed to develop class size parity. But the issue was, how do we get a family to move a child out of one school into a less crowded school? Because when we asked, it was a big resounding no. So we had to be creative. So Superintendent Giuliano asked the school committee if we would consider implementing a French immersion program. He had investigated the Holliston school system and found it to be very successful, although be it, they did have a significant French population there. We really had no numbers to speak of. With that, I did hear a nice lady mention that this is neither a right or a privilege, or we thought it was a right or a privilege. We were hoping that somebody would take us up on this and move their children. So we had volunteers who were extremely brave to put their first grader in this program. And I mean brave because they didn't know whether it would pass and fail. There were numbers, legions of people who thought it would fail. It did not. We put this program at the Cunningham School under the guiding hand of Mary Gormley, because we knew she could handle anything that came her way. Year 1 was tremendously successful, and with that, the school committee was vilified by the parents who did not choose the program. It was called elitist. It was costing too much money. Anything they threw our way, we were able to offset with correct answers. I appreciate the difficult task you have. It's a balance, but you have to be creative too. We have to keep English as our spoken language. You have the dreaded MCAS, which were never in place when I was on the school committee, and that is something that every school system is judged on. You've done a great job for all the years since I've been on the school committee. I am asking you, instead of capping a program, to try to establish another phase of enrichment and brain study. We talked about it, but we were so beaten and bruised after going through the French immersion experience that we didn't implement a math and science component to the Milton Public Schools, because there are small children that we believe can be taught anything as long as they're young and receptive. So I'm encouraging you to develop another special, wonderful program that will draw people to Milton. And by the way, not a commercial, I sell real estate. The number one thing young parents ask is, what do I know about French immersion? So I wish you the best of luck. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. The other name I have is Eric Miller. And I will come back to those people in the same order when we get our second citizen speak later in the meeting. So, move some paper. Procedurally, we need to take care of a few sets of minutes, so I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of June 6th.
So move. Second.
Moved by Ms. Sheridan, second by Ms. Kelly. Any corrections and amendments? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's unanimous.
Move approval of the June 19th, June 13th, June 19th, and June 27th minutes.
You want to do all three of them at once?
Yes, I do.
Second.
Could I raise a point of order?
It's moved, yeah.
I would need to abstain on one of them, seeing that I wasn't present at the meeting.
Let's handle them separately.
Okay.
Nice thought, Mr. Clark, but we'll,
June 13th.
June 13th, and the second by Ms. Kelly. Corrections, yes, Ms. Sheridan.
At the end, where it says Mr. Walker moved to adjourn the meeting, and then seconded by Mrs. Sheridan later, I think that the move should be right next to the second, so where it's set, because there is no discussion on a motion to adjourn, so. I'll pass this.
Any other corrections on June 13th?
Okay. Move approval of June 19th.
Well, let me, first of all, we'll vote on June 13th. All those in favor?
Yes.
Opposed, abstaining? Or you?
I wasn't there.
You weren't, so one abstention. Two abstentions, sorry. So that's 402. Okay, entertain a motion for the minutes of June 19th.
So move.
Sheridan,
Second.
second by Ms. Kelly. Any corrections to that one? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, abstaining?
Still wasn't there.
Yeah, one abstention. I just can't see your hand, I'm just trying to. So it's 501.
Did I ask everybody no, but there's
And
a chance.
I'll entertain a motion for the minutes of June 27th.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Walker, second by Ms. Sheridan. Any corrections? Ms. Sheridan?
Under the chairman's report, I think it should say who received the award on behalf of the Copeland Family Foundation. So was it Ms. Gormley that received it? Actually wasn't present at this meeting, so I had a couple of questions. So if we could just recognize that Ms. Gormley received it on behalf of the Copeland Family Foundation.
Sure.
Under the chairman's report, the last line, should say to be used for the 2012-13 school year instead of the 13-14 school year. And topic 3, the new member, oh no, sorry. And then just the very last page, next meeting agenda items, Ms. Kelly asked if, that's what I thought it should be, but okay. So instead of if the prior meeting's minutes be posted, it should say that the prior minutes be posted.
Any other corrections, comments on the minutes of the 27th? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's unanimous.
Oh, no, I have to abstain that
Oh, you
one.
have to abstain.
I wasn't there. Sorry.
501, sorry. So we will move on to the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Chairman Pavlicek. Chairman Pavlicek, do you want to have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Laura O'Dwyer, who will be part of our team?
Sure, so are
Would
you
you
going to
join-
start the presentation now, and then she'll join you?
I'd rather you introduce Laura to begin with.
All right, well, our guest tonight to help us with this first grade presentation is Dr. Laura O'Dwyer, who's Associate Professor of Educational Research, Measurement, and Evaluation at the Lynch School at BC, and also a Milton parent. We needed an expert to help us try to work our way through some of the data that we've asked for some analysis of, and we were lucky enough to have one on hand. So, she has done an enormous amount of work over the last month, both from here and seemingly from on vacation and everywhere. And so we're very pleased she's here to help us with this.
Thank you,
So
Chairman
Superintendent,
Pavlicek.
if you'd start.
So to the parents and guardians and citizens who are here tonight, and to the viewing public, this presentation will be online as of tomorrow morning. I want to recognize Dr. Martine Fisher, our world language coordinator, Holly Concanon, our elementary math coordinator, John Phelan, our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Personnel, our elementary principals, and Dr. Laura O'Dwyer, who responded, they have all responded, along with me, to the request from the school committee and responding to questions that parents and guardians, and again, citizens have regarding this important issue. So I appreciate your attendance here tonight. Again, we hope that you're comfortable and you're able to, Mr. Gillis has offered you all a seat. We want you comfortable. I'm going to present, Dr. O'Dwyer is going to, Mr. Phelan's then going to go into history of the program, the context for everyone to understand. Dr. O'Dwyer will then share with you her data analysis. So why don't we begin? The Milton Public Schools have core values. We have core values that drive our evaluation of staff, our evaluation of administrators, our programming. We come back to these core values, and we look at ourselves and we ask what's best for all children. Our core values: high academic achievement for all students, excellence in the classroom, collaborative relationships and communication, respect for human differences, and risk-taking and innovation for education. Those are our core values, and it's important to start this presentation summarizing those core values. We're a pre-K through 12 school district. We look at ourselves pre-K through 12. Those of you who heard the budget presentations, those of you who attended, I've often said that the high school principal understands the needs of the elementary school. We meet as a leadership team. We look at the whole district. And we have indicators such as the percentage of students at the high school who go out for clubs and activities. But we also have these indicators that tell us how we're competing in the state and in the nation. And we believe that these indicators really are a reflection of a K-12 education. First, the advanced placement tests. Since 2001, the Milton Public Schools has doubled the amount of AP test takers and the number of AP test takers and the number of AP tests taken, while increasing the percent of qualifying scores from 50 to 66% of all tests taken. That means that students earned a 3, 4, and 5 college credit, and when you meet with the representatives from the College Board, the highest indicator to success at university are these advanced placement classes, participation, and the scoring on these classes that are offered at Milton High School. The SATs. Since 2002, Milton High School has increased the percentage of students taking the SAT from 90 to 99%, while maintaining an average combined score of 1550. The combined score average for all schools nationwide, public and private, is 1,500. Another indicator that we look at, college acceptance. 97% of our students graduating from Milton High School go on to 2- and 4-year colleges. Again, this doesn't happen beginning at the 10th grade. This is a pre-K through 12 school district. The Milton Public Schools' success are elementary programs. The Milton Public Schools school system provides 2 incredible elementary program options: elementary English with Spanish and French immersion. The Milton Public Schools has maintained and flourished in the area of world language instruction for elementary students, while other districts in the state have reduced or have to eliminate these offerings. The Milton Public Schools, the historic review of the elementary programming. Spanish, Ms. McNaught gave you some of the history tonight. Spanish at the elementary level was introduced in all 4 schools in September of 1998. In the last 5 years, the amount of Spanish instructional time offered to students in grades 1 through 5 has remained constant. The French immersion program began in one school, the Cunningham Elementary, in September of 1987. The French immersion program currently exists in all 4 of our elementary schools. Milton Public Schools program enrollment trends. What brings us here tonight? Over time, the district has monitored the enrollment trends of each program. The purpose of the annual analysis is to ensure that both programs were meeting the needs of all students and to inform the district's strategy in student assignment each year. In 2008-2009, grade 1 enrollment data began to indicate an increasing percentage of parents and guardians choosing French immersion for their children. We've detailed this historic enrollment trend, which was referred to tonight during Citizen Speak. We bring your attention to 2012-13, 34% of the families choosing English, 66% of the families choosing French immersion. Along with this historic enrollment trend, we have to then look at the number of classes and look at what the average class size will be. And again, we've brought your eye to, again, small class sizes in English next year for the 2012-2013 school year, while in the French immersion, the average class size will be 25.1. And we referred to the periodic review of enrollment trends and analyzing every year what's happening going into our first grades. During the 2009-2010 school year, the Milton Public Schools commissioned the World Language Committee to analyze enrollment trends for both programs. Our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Personnel, John Phelan, and School Committee member, Kristen Bagley-Jones, co-chaired this committee of teachers, parents, and guardians to look at Milton Public Schools elementary program options and to make recommendations to analyze all of the data. Now I'm going to turn this part over to Mr. Phelan, who co-chaired, as I just said, with Kristen Bagley-Jones, to give you the history of that committee and what they study and found.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I appreciate your time and value your input, whether you're in favor of what we're talking about or not. The World Language Committee was commissioned in 2010 to really unpack this very, very complicated issue of how we assign our students and keep intact the two programs that we enjoy in the Milton Public Schools. This started with collaborating with a group of administrators, teachers, and parents. It should be noted that we recruited and made sure that we had parents who both had children either in the French program or the English program, and we had teachers from both programs as well, so we could have a balanced view. We solicited input from all teachers through a survey, as we did with parents and guardians also. We analyzed each of the elementary programs, developed 4 possible scenarios, and identified the strengths and weaknesses of each assignment plan. Ultimately, we created the alternative assignment plan as the option that the school committee and the administration went forward with as the means in which we would assign students to our grade 1 programs each year. The assignment plan as we know it is the one that we have been working with through the last 3 years to 4 years. And as you know, a parent can select a grade 1 program for their child. There are a fixed number of classrooms at each school that services each program. A lottery would be held at the school if in fact there are not enough seats for the students to fill up for the program that they chose. And if there were too many at a school, we would offer an auxiliary class, possibly at their home school, but most likely at an alternative site that we would pick that had the room to facilitate this classroom. The discussions that we had with the World Language Committee in our 4 options talked about the concern for sustainability of each program, which led to a large discussion about the topic of capping. The general consensus, not to speak personally for the whole group, was that this was a viable option. It wasn't one that was necessarily popular with parents, but it was an option that we felt may be a next step if these trends did continue. As we look at the trending of how many auxiliary classes we needed prior to the program switch, or the structure switch to the alternative program, we have here the 2007, 8, 8 and 9, 9 and 10, and the World Language Report was written in this year. We required in our first year of this programming, of student assignment, 2 additional auxiliary classes to fill the demand. Last year was 1 additional class, and this year we will need to provide 2 additional classes of French immersion as auxiliary classes. This brings us back to just the raw percentage of how many students over the past 6 years have asked to be in the program, and we have tried to facilitate and have each family into their program choice. This brings us back to the concern that we have about the trending moving forward to a large disparity of families wanting the French program and what that may mean for our English program. So our concern for having two viable programs is back in question.
So the impact of the enrollment trends on optimal classroom learning environments. The decreased enrollment in English with Spanish program has, as you heard tonight, and we presented at the Law School Committee, created single strands in schools, has limited the flexibility of classroom assignment, has limited options for inclusion programs, and limited the pool of role models for co-taught programs. Increased enrollment in French immersion has increased class size to 26 per class with no educational assistance support, and, as you'll hear through the data presentation tonight, resulted in an imbalance of student demographic representation in both programs. Thus, the enrollment imbalance has limited the district's ability to provide the best learning environment for all students when we're dealing with student assignment. The timeline of the process to date, to bring you back to those of you who haven't followed what happened. In April 2012, the leadership team meets and reviews program selection for 2012-13 school year. In June 2012, I presented to the school committee the concerns about the imbalance, the percentage of families who had chosen French immersion, and what these trends would mean, again, dealing with student assignment and creating healthy classroom environments where all children can thrive, and I recommended capping as an option. At that meeting, the school committee charged and asked if they could have student data related to both programs, and that brings us here tonight to the presentation on student achievement by Dr. Laura O'Dwyer. Dr. Laura O'Dwyer teaches at Boston College, as you already heard from Mr. Pavlicek, and Dr. O'Dwyer volunteered to be on the screening committee for the high school principal. And I know the program that Dr. O'Dwyer is involved in at Boston College. When I was there with Dr. George Medaus, and her experience is really in program evaluation. She'll describe her experience, but it's nationwide. And actually international. We are very fortunate to be able to have had Dr. O'Dwyer work with us, take all of our data, and be able to respond to the school committee's request to look at the data in both programs. I think it will be valuable. I know it will be valuable for the school committee, the citizens, and the parents in the community. Dr. O'Dwyer.
Thank you all for coming. I'm going to turn around a little so that I don't just end up talking to both of you, or to the committee, because I'm sure parents are very interested in hearing about this, because as I gather, this is the first time that these type of data results have been presented to parents. Just to tell you a little bit more about who I am, as Superintendent Gormley said, I'm an associate professor in the Educational Measurement Research and Evaluation Department at Boston College. Data analysis around educational outcomes is what we do. This is what I teach students. This is what I do in my research. It's everything that I do. I have worked with Maine, the state of Maine. I've worked in New Hampshire. I've worked with the state of Vermont, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. Now working with Connecticut, looking at their educational outcomes for ELL minority students. I've worked with school districts in California, in Louisiana, as well as working with national and international databases looking at educational outcomes. In my teaching, I train doctoral students to become assessment specialists at school districts like Milton, and to help them understand how you go about making data-driven decisions. So this is where I came to this. Superintendent Gormley, because we had met on the screening committee,
asked if I would help the administration look at some of their data around the French immersion program, and this is how I came to be involved. So what I'm going to do is talk about MCAS data, 5th grade MCAS data and 3rd grade MCAS data. So just to give a little start. You're all familiar with the MCAS. It has been around since the late 80s, and only since 2002 has it been used, well, 2003, has it been used as sort of a way to evaluate schools and students under the No Child Left Behind Act. So it really is the yardstick against which we measure student performance and how schools are performing in Massachusetts. Other states obviously have their own state tests. So this is what I'm going to be looking at today. And just to give you a quick overview of the way that I'm presenting the data, or the way that I'm summarizing the data, I should say. MCAS scores are reported on a scale from 200 to 280, right? Those are calculated from students' raw scores, basically the number of scores, number of items or questions that students get correct. So from that, the state takes the scores, converts them to scale scores ranging from 200 to 280. On top of that, then, it takes those scale scores and divides them into 4 performance categories. So you will see the 2 lowest ones are warning and needs improvement, and then the 2 upper ones that I've highlighted are the proficient and advanced ranges. So we often see school districts reporting their average scale score and also the percent of students scoring in the advanced and proficient ranges. So I'm going to talk about them both ways as well, just depending on how people are familiar with the MCAS data. All right. So as I said earlier, Superintendent Gormley came to me and asked if I would analyze the data because it was what was requested by the school committee. They wanted to see what the trends were. Right? So from there, I was going to look at MCAS data, and I was going to look at 5th grade MCAS scores in English Language Arts, so that's ELA and mathematics, from the 2005-2006 year up to the 2010-2011 school year. Right? Also going to present an analysis of the 3rd grade data, but only for one cohort of students, and that is the 2010-2011 school year. So between the two, I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to give you an overview of how students in Milton are performing and how the French and English programs compare in terms of their outcomes on the MCAS. Okay. All right. So I'm going to start first with the 5th grade, because that is the one where I was able to do the most extensive analyses because data were available for 5 years. At the 3rd grade, we only have data for 1 year available. So the questions guiding the analysis for the 5th grade were, how are students performing on the MCAS? So how are they performing over time? Right? How do they compare to the state? And how do the English and the French programs compare to each other? So those were my 2 guiding questions. So first things first, compare Milton to the state average. So what you're seeing here is the percent of students scoring in the advanced and proficient ranges. Now anything below the proficient range is essentially failing. Okay? It's not exactly failing, it's warning. It's one level below is warning. But the benchmark that schools have to use for federal reporting requirements is around the percentage of students scoring in the advanced and proficient ranges. So that's what I'm reporting here. So that you can see, for example, right here, you can see that in the 2005-2006 school year, 64% of all Milton students, regardless of program, were scoring in the advanced or proficient ranges, compared to 59% in the state. So you'll see across each of the 6 years, right, that the Milton schools have a higher percentage of students scoring in the advanced and in the proficient and advanced ranges compared to the state in English language arts. Right. You're seeing a similar pattern here in mathematics, right? A higher percentage of students in Milton are scoring in the proficient and advanced ranges compared to the state. Right? So overall, all Milton public school students are doing well when measured with the MCAS. Okay. The next piece then was to look at the French and the English programs. And I will ask you not to jump to any major conclusions here yet, until I go through the data a little bit more. Right? So this slide presents the English and the French programs average, the percentage of students scoring in the advanced and proficient ranges, and then the blue line represents the Milton average. So what you're seeing here is that, in fact, there are differences in the percentage of fifth grade students scoring in the advanced and proficient ranges in the English and the French programs. Right. Just to mark it out for you, we're seeing a 28.4 percentage point. It's not a 28.4% difference, it's a 28.4 percentage point difference. But what you're seeing is that over time, that the gap between the two is decreasing. Okay. So this is in English language arts, right? We're seeing that overall the gap between the French and the English programs is slightly narrower in mathematics. Right. Again, you see the percentage points, and it's staying pretty constant over the 6 years of data that are available to analyze. Right. Okay, now again, I'm asking you not to jump to any conclusions here, because this is what we see all the time. Right? In education, we see this all of the time because of self-selection issues. I would never conclude professionally that one program was better than the other based on this data alone, and I'll come back to that in a second. Right. Remember I said that there were two ways to report data. The first one was the percent of students in the proficient and advanced ranges, and the second was to look at the average scale score. Remember, scale scores range from 200 to 280. So here, you'll see on the vertical axis there, you'll see the 200 to 280 scale, and you'll see where the English and the French programs are and how they compare to each other. So again, we're seeing a difference here. This is English language arts. We're seeing about a 10-point difference in 2005. And again, over time, we're seeing that they are decreasing. Right? We're seeing that the difference between the two is decreasing or tending to decrease over time. In mathematics, we're seeing the same difference, maybe a little bit smaller earlier on, but we are seeing a difference, and here are the scale score point differences that you can see between the two. Right. Smallest difference being in 2005, 2006, and the largest difference being in the 09-10 school year. So the question is, right, the burning question is, what could possibly explain these differences? One could jump to the conclusion that one program is better than the other, but that wouldn't be using all of the information that you have available to you. We see this all of the time in education. For example, charter schools versus public schools, right? They're the same public school students, right? But some parents will opt to put their child in the lottery for a charter school, and then you will find that the charter school students do better. However, when you control for demographic characteristics, parental aspirations, or parental expectations, the difference actually decreases. You see the same thing even with public and private school educations. Once you control for student background, parental aspirations, parental expectations, parental education, all of these things, in fact, public school students tend to outperform private school students. Right? So the question for me here was, what could possibly be explaining this difference? Right? I wasn't charged to look at curriculum issues. I just had de-identified student data. And my goal was to see if perhaps there were measured characteristics that that might explain some of these differences. Right. So the question that came to me then was, are there differences in the demographic characteristics across the two programs? And if you take those into account statistically, do those differences either decrease or disappear entirely? So that was the question that I had. This is, again, the 5th grade data. Okay, so let's look at the first question. Are there differences in the demographic characteristics of the students in the two programs? Right? Now remember, when a parent goes to enroll their student or their first grader, they're in kindergarten at that point, in the French versus the English program, all sorts of measured and unmeasured characteristics. Right? When I say measured characteristics, I'm talking about whether the child comes from a low-income family, or whether the child has an IEP or is an English language learner. Right? Those are measured characteristics, but there are also characteristics that are unmeasured. The data aren't collected. They are measurable. They are just unmeasured at the school level. And these would be parental aspirations, expectations, parental education, resources, number of times a kid is brought to a museum during the year, all of these things. So this is what I was looking at. I was going to look at the measured characteristics, the measured demographic characteristics. First, I wanted to look at the concentration of male students in the two programs. Now, one warning here as I go through this. Right? I have presented the percentage of students on purpose because the absolute numbers don't tell you anything about the density of the subgroup, right? Male, for example, being subgroup. So 1 male out of 10 is different from 1 male out of 2. So I've presented this as a density, so percentage of the total number. I'll give you an example right here. So for example, 56.3% of the English students were male in the 2005-2006 school year. Right? So the numbers of students in the English program and the numbers of students in the French program are different. So essentially, the denominator in the calculation of the percentage will differ from year to year and also from English program to French program. Right? So when you do that, when you're comparing percentages, we have to be very careful about looking at small percentages. Right? So 2 students in a group of 4 makes up 50%. Right? So we have to be careful of that. Okay. So what we're seeing here is that the percentage of males in the French and English programs was out of balance for a number of years, but it seems to be a little bit more balanced in the last 2 years in terms of the division between males and females, at least for up to the data that we have. The next one is the percent minority. So this is any minority other than white. So we're looking at the percent minority students in the English and the French programs. So what we're seeing here is that there is a higher percentage of minority students in the English program compared to the French program. Let me give you some numbers here. Okay. It was just too confusing to put them all in the slides. All right. So let's take this number here, 2008, 2009. So 34% of the English were minority. Right? So that is 68 out of 198 students were minority students. Right here in the French program, we've only got 6.3%. In fact, that year, only 6 out of 96 students in the French program were minority students. Right? So we're seeing an imbalance across the two programs with higher percentages of minority students in the English program. Now let me remind you why I'm doing this, just in case you've forgotten my original question. I'm trying to figure out why there would be a gap between the two programs, right? Leaving aside curricular issues that I wasn't charged with looking at, are there demographic differences between the students enrolled in the two programs that could be accounting for some of this difference? Okay, so that was minority status. Low income, we're seeing the same thing here. We're seeing a higher percentage of low-income students enrolled in the English program when compared to the French program. I'll give you a number here. Let's take the 2007-2008 school year. All right. So in that year, 40 out of the 199 English students were low income, but only 1 out of the 82 French students were low income that year. Right. Now what you're seeing is that when you're comparing outcomes in the English and the French programs, that the demographics for the two groups are quite different from each other. They differ from year to year, but they definitely do differ. Right? And unfortunately, and this is available for any of you who would be interested in the topic further, there is a nationwide achievement gap that is well documented and well researched between these subgroups and majority white students. So we just have to be careful. Okay, so let's look at the students with IEPs. Okay, so again, we're seeing a higher percentage of students with IEPs in the English program compared to the French program. Let's take the 2006-2007 school year as an example. 33 out of 191, so that's the 17.3%, and only 6 out of the 108 students in the French program had IEPs. Oh, I'm sorry, an individualized education plan, right, yeah. Okay. Let me just catch up with myself here for a second. So the question then, for me, as a data analyst and a methodologist and somebody who was trying to understand the problem at hand, was to figure out whether the differences that are observed between the programs could be attributable to the demographic differences. And in fact, if you're going to compare the two programs, you have to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges, basically. Right? So what I wanted to do, or what I did, was I tried to explore the question by matching students on gender, low-income status, minority status, and IEP status, and tried to see whether, when I account for the differences in the demographic characteristics across the two programs, what would happen to the observed differences between the two groups at each of the 6 years. So let me remind you, so this was how it was in English language arts. So we had a 10-point difference, 7.1 difference, all the way up to a 6.8 difference. Right? So when I accounted for gender, IEP status, minority status, and low-income status, we see that the gaps decreased. Right? They decreased from, for example, in the 2005-2006 year, decreased to 6.9, decreased from 7.1 to 0.8, right? Decreased from 6.8 to 3.9, right? Now, one of the things that we also do in educational research is try to make an evaluation as to whether the difference that we see is large enough that we could conclude that that it didn't occur by chance. Right? We call this statistical significance. Right? Those numbers right there that I pointed out originally were each statistically significant. What that told me was that the difference between students in the English and the French programs was statistically significant at for each of the 6 years that I looked at. Right? The difference essentially between the two was large enough that it could not have occurred by chance if in fact there was no difference between the two groups. Two programs. However, when I accounted for gender, IEP status, low income status, minority status, and we found that the gaps decreased so that they were no longer, so that they were no longer significant in 3 out of the 6 years, right? Now, remember, I'm only accounting for measured differences, demographic differences that were available to me in the de-identified student data. I didn't have measures of parental aspirations, expectations, education, all of these things, right? I suspect that if I were able to account for those and to match the programs on those, that this gap would decrease further to the point of all 6 years being non-significant. So here it is in math. Here was our original gap. Again, all of the point differences were statistically significant. Right? When I accounted for all of the IEP status, minority status, low-income status, and gender, the gaps decreased. So, for example, it decreased from 9 points to 0.8 of a scale score point, right? In the most recent year. And these became non-significant. And when you hear that something becomes non-significant, there can still be a difference, like there is still a difference right here of 0.8 points, 0.8 of a point, but it's not different from 0 essentially. So what I concluded after looking at this was that it is more appropriate to compare the groups, compare the results of the programs after accounting for demographic differences. Because when you don't account for demographic differences, in fact, you're comparing apples to oranges, essentially. So just to summarize the 5th grade, right, before I go on to the 3rd grade analysis. So on average, 5th grade students in Milton are outperforming, or they're performing higher than the state, performing higher than state average. Right? So they're doing well overall. Both programs are doing well overall. However, there are differences between the two programs. The students in the French program, when you don't account for differences in demographic characteristics, tend, on first blush, to outperform students in the English program. However, you can't conclude, based on the data, that the programs, one program is more or less effective than the other. Right? Because I found that the difference decreased when you match students on gender, IEP status, low income status, and minority status. So my original 2 questions, right? Were there differences in demographics? Yes, there were. There tended to be a higher proportion of male, minority, low income, and IEP students in the English program when compared to the French program. And if students are matched on demographic characteristics, do the differences between the 2 programs decrease? And the answer again is yes, they do. Right? They do decrease. Right? Let me go back. Okay. So, overall, using the measured characteristics that are available to me in the state and school databases, professionally, I would not be able to conclude that one program is more or less effective than the other. Right? So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is the 3rd grade analysis. Now, just to be clear, I only have 1 year of 3rd grade data to compare. Sorry, to compare the 2 programs. Okay. So in this case, 2 questions. What are the average MCAS scores for students in the French and the English program? And what are the average scores by subgroup? Okay, so I've used different markers here just so that you don't confuse it with the English program. Right? Can I get rid of that little thing on the bottom there?
I don't think you can. I don't think you can. It's part of the PowerPoint.
Part of the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so if you ignore the little rectangle in the corner, you'll see that the blue diamond is the average scale score for the French, and the yellow circle is the average scale score for the English. And you'll see it here on the left for English Language Arts, and you'll see it on the right for mathematics. Right? So you'll see here that in English Language Arts, there is only a small difference in average scale score points between the two programs, and this is not statistically significant. Right? For mathematics, you'll see that the French program is scoring slightly higher than the English program. Again, it's not statistically significant. There are very small differences in this point, in this case. So now I've broken it out by minority, non-minority. This is for English Language Arts, right? So what we're seeing is that, unfortunately, minority students tend to be scoring lower in both the English and the French program, but it doesn't, they tend to be scoring lower than non-minority students. However, it is the same pattern with only tiny differences associated with programs. So they seem to be doing as well in both programs. For mathematics, we're seeing the same thing. And here we have broken out by subgroup, by low income and not low income. And again, we're seeing the similar pattern that we saw for minority status. There were only very small differences, again, non-significant differences within program. Now, when I say within program, what I'm saying is that a minority student in the French program is doing as well as a non-minority student in the English program. Remember my caveat, though, earlier is that the numbers are smaller. So the numbers are smaller. Here we have for low income, same pattern. For math, for English Language Arts, for IEP and non-IEP. Now, IEP, of any of the subgroups that we look at, IEP, or having an IEP, is the only one that is associated, or could possibly be associated with some cognitive or learning weaknesses, right? There are no known learning weaknesses associated with being low income, being minority, right? Being male or being female. They're just, they don't exist, right? There's no reason cognitively that that should be the case, right? So IEP status, we are seeing a very slight difference between the French and the English programs for students with IEPs. Namely, that students with IEPs tend to have higher scores when they're in the French program. Again, I didn't do an analysis here where I accounted for other demographic characteristics. And we see the same in math for IEP. Okay, so the summary for the third grade, it is similar to the summary for the fifth grade in that we are seeing differences, slight differences between the two programs. Right. Tend to be a little bit higher in the French program than in the English program, but they're not statistically significant. So the important thing to note here is that this is the most recent data that we have available. So these are the 2 years from now, these are going to be fifth graders, right? So I think it will be interesting to see whether gaps are emerging between third and fifth grade, and what they might be attributable to if they do emerge. Right? But for now, the third graders in the English and the French program seem to be doing almost as well as each other, and subgroups, with the exception of IEP students, tend to be doing as well in either program. So the overall summary then is that we have to be very careful when we compare outcomes, student outcomes in two programs that are so different demographically. There are, I was able to account for some of the measured differences, but there are still unmeasured differences there that could further decrease the difference between the two. So I would advise you not to conclude that one program is more or less effective than the other based on MCAS data. The data don't support that conclusion. And I think that is actually passing it back to Mary.
And if you go to the next slide, Dr. O'Dwyer?
Sure.
So the district, what brought us here tonight? Why are we looking to change the student assignment process? The district is responsible for 2 high-quality programs that provide optimal learning environments for all students. We talked about, at the last meeting, district capacity. The change in enrollment trends has produced an imbalance that limits the district's ability to create optimal learning environments for all students within our schools, our programs, and our classrooms. When the percentage becomes 66% children, parents who choose French immersion for their children. It's very difficult to create programs and to balance the programs when the balance is 33% children in the English program. Again, then we're looking at student achievement. Student achievement data over time indicates an achievement gap between the French and the English programs that can be associated with the imbalance of demographics between programs. So if we're looking at these subgroups in the English program, we need to look at our student assignment process. We need to balance the programs in both the English and the French program. We have a responsibility to educate all the children and to create sound learning environments for all of the children in the Milton Public Schools. So, my recommendation is, in order to continue to offer 2 robust programs for Milton Public School students, the district should adapt the current lottery system and implement a lottery capping model as developed by the 2010 World Language Committee to ensure a quality education environment for all children through balanced program enrollment. Again, we want to look at every single classroom. You heard Dr. O'Dwyer talk about the demographics of the population. Again, we want to have numbers that we could bring you back to the slide, that we're able to assure inclusion, we're able to have role models, we're able to have students, the number of students in each of our classrooms that really reflect the population. And so that really concludes our presentation tonight. We're going to put this presentation online, and now if the school committee might have some questions of Dr. O'Dwyer, John Phelan, or myself. I want to thank you, Dr. O'Dwyer.
You're welcome.
Kristen.
I will come back to my questions, but I did want to thank Dr. O'Dwyer. That was an incredible amount of work and an incredible presentation, and you did it all to no cost to the taxpayer, and many hours volunteered by you, as many parents do, but I know everybody agrees. It was just an incredible job what you did, so thank you.
So, we'll open this up for... All right. We'll open this up for questions from the school committee. I know parents and visitors in the audience may have questions, and I'm sure you do after hearing this. There's so many people who are interested in this. We can't really open this floor up to questions from everybody. We will have another citizen speak at the end of the meeting. I would invite you, if you have questions that we don't ask and don't get answered here tonight, if you want to come up and sort of ask them through citizen speak, we will try to get them answered and get answers back out. But we can't really, given the number of people in this room, open this up to sort of a public hearing on this. So I'd like to just try to limit this to get some questions from the school committee. So Kristen, you had deferred one, so you want to start?
I know one question that came up was, why do we only have 1 year on grade 3?
MCAS has only been administered in English Language Arts and Mathematics for 1 year. Prior to that, it was just in writing. Writing or reading? Can't remember.
Wasn't it the reading?
Yeah, it was reading.
It was
reading. Yeah.
Reading.
It's
Yeah.
It was,
Ms. Collins.
I believe only this last year did they provide data that you were able to use beyond a single test and able to compare it.
Right. Could we get a little bit more explanation on that? Because I certainly remember I think third graders have been taking MCAS tests for a number of years.
Right.
So what is it that prevented us from comparing that data, previous year's data, to last year's data?
Yeah, I don't believe they gave, I'll find the exact answer about the comparative, why we couldn't use it for comparative data until last year.
Well, just to be clear, I mean,
Right, they weren't
third graders
assessed-
have been taking
yeah,
the test,
but
so
they-
it's
but
not.
not in-
I think it's the way the state has returned the scores. It wasn't disaggregated enough that we could deal with it. I think it was, originally, I know the first couple of years, it was only school scores. You know, one score for a school. It wasn't per student or any way that people could analyze it that way. So it's a question of how the state has reported back to us and what sort of.
They were also assessed in reading and writing, and not in English language arts and mathematics.
Right.
Which is, English language arts and mathematics is more aligned with what they're assessed in 5th grade, 8th grade, 10th grade.
So just following up on that, can we come to conclusions on one grade's worth of information? It seems.
No.
Okay, so essentially from the grade 3 performance, there's really no conclusions we can come to.
No, that was sort of an add-on. Even, you could probably tell from where it was in the presentation, it was an add-on to the original, which was just supposed to be 5th grade.
Okay.
Third grade was added in response to a school committee question to look at third
Yes.
grade. And that was the-
Yes.
So
Well-
she added it in at the end. It was originally going to be a fifth grade presentation.
I guess I fear that conclusions will be drawn by presenting information like that. I think we just need to couch what data is provided here and make sure that everybody understands. I would love for us to be able to analyze across all grades. I don't know that 5th grade is, I mean, it's certainly one snapshot, but we have a progression. I think we prefer to analyze what the present demographics are for each of our grades going into 12, 13. It would not be the same as what has been presented for grade 5.
Right.
As a matter of fact, next year's grade 5s, just from a class size perspective, have actually balanced out.
And
It used to be that there was dramatically lower class sizes in French and higher class sizes in English, and now it's basically come to.
And I have a
equilibrium.
number of recent graduate with PhDs who would love to have a position in Milton Public Schools doing that, but unfortunately, it's.
Well, I guess I would add, I think it's part of the obligation of this administration and this committee to somehow figure out a way that this data is readily available so that, to your point, I mean, you're teaching people how to analyze assessments. That's part of our job, and I think somehow we have to figure out a way, especially as complicated as our delivery systems of education are, to be on top of that year after year after year, just part of the normal presentation of data.
I do know that some small school districts will share an assessment specialist across 2 or 3 different school districts.
And that's why you originally chose the 5th grade data, because you could do the longitudinal analysis of it.
Right.
John?
No, I just wanted to set the context behind why we chose the grades and why we chose a certain type of data. We chose 5th grade because that's where the experience was similar for all students prior to going on to middle school, where the program differences started to separate a little bit. So we were trying to capture their elementary experience without having to capture every grade, because that data challenge was a large one. So we had to pick a window of time and a group of students that we felt best represented the elementary experience. In response to the grade 1 data, and acknowledging that there's only 1 year of data, which doesn't give us a tremendous amount of information, even though it did continue the trending that we saw with grade 5, was an attempt to try to provide data that was the most recent we had in connection with some of the class size differences and program percentage differences that are starting to trend out as we are seeing right now. Member Kelly is very correct that each year that we looked at this data was a different percentage of French and English students percent by year, and the class size difference that each child experienced was different by year. So controlling for all that to the best of our ability, we were trying to bring forth data that best represented a child's elementary experience over time at the end of their elementary years.
Ms. Sheridan?
Dr. O'Dwyer, you explained about students on individual educational plans. Could you explain to the public and the school committee how the determination is made for low income, please?
Students that are classified as low income are students that are eligible for free or reduced price lunch, and there are federal income guidelines, income and family size guidelines, as to whether a student is eligible for free or reduced price lunch. Depending on their poverty level, they will get a reduced price or a free lunch. So according to the data, the de-identified data that I had, I combined the two together. So anybody that either got free lunch or reduced price lunch was classified as low income. And that's standard practice.
Right, it is standard, but I think it's important for people to understand that that's not a determination that the school department makes.
No.
And people
No, it's not.
self-identify
Yes.
to be free and reduced. So
They do.
it's only based on parents who choose to fill out the form and return it to the food service department, who then...
That is correct. Free or reduced lunch status or low-income status tends to be underreported the higher up the grades go. So, for example, at the high school level, you find very, very low percentages of students receiving free or reduced price lunch. And it's not that they have suddenly gotten wealthier, it's that the kids, as they become older, are starting to refuse to self-identify or allow their parents to self-identify them. So that's a very good point, yeah.
In Milton, we've done a lot to try and have student cards so children don't have to be singled out if they use have free or reduced lunch. Thank you.
Ms. Bagley-Jones.
Hi. I guess I have a comment and then a question that might not even be for you, Dr. Dwyer. One, I'm really concerned with the achievement gap data, as I know we all are, and I know it's across the country, and that was not your charge. But just as we're looking at this data, I know it's going to really bother all of us what it looks like for some of our kids in Milton. And
So just to be clear, you're referring to the third grade, because I didn't present any
Right.
achievement gap for the fifth grade.
But as you showed your data, the gap was less and less on some of the slides, right? Except for students with IEP?
No, actually, those were the percentage of students that were either male or low income. It was not their scores. Right? If you want me to go back to?
Oh, well, maybe you can tutor me later on after the presentation, because I didn't get that.
Okay. Can I go back to a slide for a second?
Absolutely. Maybe it's just me then.
Becky, can you grab that?
I'll get it.
I think what Ms. Bagley-Jones was referring to is the achievement gap between, for instance, minority and non-minority students, not French versus English.
Right.
Yes.
It's a larger issue.
Except that I didn't present that, so I'm not sure which slide you're referring to. Would it be this one? No, further on?
Let me see if I mark
Okay,
it.
further.
If you want to go on something else, I can look at my
35.
notes.
Look at your notes.
I'll look at my notes and come back to it.
Okay.
And answer other people's questions.
I suspect that you're thinking about
Third grade slide.
slide number 35, right? So just to be clear, in fact, that this is the density or the percentage of the total number of students that are minority. So, for example, John, could you point at, let's say, 2010, 11? So of all of the English students, 38.7 were minority students. I don't have anything there to show a gap in achievement.
It's just a percentage
Only
of students in
place
Got it.
that it was perhaps is in the third grade slides. Let me find one. Okay, if you look at slide number
47.
47. Okay. So there you're seeing that minority students tend to have scale scores that were slightly lower than non-minority students in both programs, but those differences were very small at the third grade. Right? And unfortunately, we do see, the differences between the gaps sort of increase at critical grade spans. We see the same with gender. You would be unlikely to see a gender difference at the third grade or even the fifth grade, but by the time you get to the eighth grade, you do see gaps.
Ms. Kelly.
So can you just talk about the use of average in this? Average, to me, can hide some underlying data.
Yes, absolutely.
And where providing the information in advance, proficient, needs improvement, and gives it a different look.
Yes.
So like if you were to take the third grade analysis and convert it to what I just described, how different would it look?
That would require another sleepless night to do that. So I
apologize,
didn't
I don't want
actually
that.
get to that.
I don't want to put that on you.
All right. I suspect that it would be informative to do that. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Would you repeat that question?
Yeah.
It would be.
Mrs. Kelly, will you repeat the question?
Right, so the question is, when you use averages, you can have numbers that range like this, be the same average as numbers that are like this. And I think for us to understand truly what's going on here, we need to understand the span of achievement from high to low.
Yes.
And I think that's an important component of what we will need to do as to how we move forward in terms of helping the administration come to some conclusions in terms of student assignment. And so when we look at data that has averages in it, I think it can be misleading if we don't understand the underlying data.
Absolutely. It's very easy to obfuscate everything with data analyses. And if I did have more time, I would have done a more thorough job with the third grade. What you're referring to here is that there are distributions and that you have, for example, low-income students that are performing better than non-low-income students. There is a distribution. However, when you average it and don't talk about how variable that distribution is, you are losing some of the information. So again, a more, when next steps with analyzing your data would certainly look at distributions. Yeah.
Other question, Mr. Walker.
Can you go to slides 51 and 52?
Sure.
Should we turn
She
the
has
lights?
the buttons. If you kick it up 4 to 51. Oh, you went too far. Back 2. All right.
So here for IEP,
Lights down or up?
for English language arts, there's a 10-point difference, and for math, there's a 15-point difference. Did you say those weren't statistically significant?
Okay, that's one of the things about analyzing data. When you're looking at statistical significance, it is directly related to sample size.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So being unable to see a difference can be because there is no difference or because your sample size is too small. So in this case...
In this case, we know what the sample size was, correct?
We do. I don't actually know that I said it was not significant here.
Well, that's
but-
the question.
Yeah, no. It may have been statistically significant. I think the other ones was where I was talking about it not being statistically significant.
Okay.
I suspect it is
I
statistically.
suspect it is too. Thanks.
Again, because I wasn't able to adjust, or I didn't do analyses to adjust for demographic characteristics,
Yeah.
Statistical significance was less important here to me.
Ms. Kelly.
Just in terms of what data was included, all students, all Milton Public School students were included in this
Correct.
data?
Correct. There were some cases where data were missing. So, for example, let me give you an example of where data were missing. In the 2009-2010 school year, 19 students in the English program were missing all of their demographics, and 5 of the English students were missing their demographics. So in some cases, the denominators changed slightly. So if I included gender or IEP status or these kinds of things, for that year, the sample sizes would go down. However, those were the only cases where there were missing data, right? But going back to the original data that I had, that I was provided with from the administration, I was provided with de-identified data for every Milton public school student for those years.
Right, so I guess I'd like some clarification on that. So students who are attending out-of-district placement are included in this data? Students that are in the NEC, not the NEC program, but our co-taught classrooms are included in this data? That's correct, so it's everyone?
So, correct. So what we did was we literally took the database from our school system. We erased the names because every student is assigned a number by the state, and that data provided this child's ID number, gender, and any other demographic information. We then downloaded directly from the state portal all the student achievement scores by that same ID number. So Dr. O'Dwyer could match number for number with our demographic data from the database with the state's exact student achievement database. Students who may have left or students that may have been deactivated, Dr. O'Dwyer did control for that and did see that come up in her data samples as she was putting the two databases together. So to reassure the public, no names were used in this data collection, and no names were used in any of the conversations that we had around the student achievement data.
So I guess then English includes students that are attending out-of-district placement, is that what?
They were not included to my knowledge.
So
'Cause they-
out-of-district placement was not included?
That's correct.
Ms. Bagley-Jones.
I don't know, Dr. O'Dwyer, if these are directed at you, but maybe you could help us with this. You've noticed the class size over the years in the French immersion program goes down and the English go up, and obviously that has an impact on academic achievement. Would that be something that you would look at again? I know you're not necessarily going to do this again, but if we did more studies, because I think that's pretty significant, right? I mean,
Right.
if you go from 26 in grade 1 to, what is it in grade 5 for some of the classes?
Right.
It's pretty different.
It is. There are studies out there that look at class size. There was one of the most famous educational experiments ever conducted was around class size, called the STAR study in Tennessee. And they did find that class size was a very strong positive predictor of higher student outcomes, and those persisted. So the effects of being in a small classroom, right, did persist 2, 3, 4 years out. However, looking at class size is a very tricky thing, because sometimes students end up in small classes because they need remediation. Now, it's less likely these days because you have more inclusion classes, but it's not always an indicator of one-on-one attention and high-quality instruction to have a small class size. Likewise, it's not an indication of poor instruction and poor one-to-one attention when you have large class sizes. Some teachers are much, much better at it than others. So I would suggest that you do look at it, because it is it's a complicated issue. Yes.
Questions?
I have others, but
I
I don't
have
want to
some.
take...
Please.
I'm sure people...
Take it away.
Okay. And this is, again, not directed, I don't think Dr. O'Dwyer can answer this, but I would put it back to Superintendent Gormley and Dr. Fisher. The other programs that do immersion, I think we have about 300 in this country, is that right? Oh, I don't want to put you on the spot. Okay, well, I would be curious, is it about 300 immersion programs in the country? And I think, my understanding from being on the World Language Committees, I think almost all of them cap. Not saying cap or don't cap, I'm just saying, I think that they're all structured where there's a cap.
Well, to
But I'd
the...
like clarification
Good.
on
To
that.
the parents' reference to that during Citizen Speak, and you had asked me that question. Dr. Fisher is researching that through a national bureau, so that we'll be able to get that information for you.
Can I keep going, or do other people? Okay. The other one was around special ed support for children with learning challenges or an IEP or a 504. I always thought anecdotally that the French program was not able to support children with specific learning challenges, and that some of those kids were sort of needed to go back into English. But am I right? And again, clearly you need to help me with this understanding. What you're saying with the IEP students, you say it on slide, students with IEPs, rather. I had
Oh, right. It's right up there.
Oh, okay. So the bottom line, IEP students in the French program do almost as well as non-IEP students in the French program.
Right. Well,
So what's that
again,
about?
students, IEPs range from students who perhaps need speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy,
Okay.
to students who have cognitive issues and have to have remediation and work with a resource teacher, a special ed teacher. So the span is huge for these IEPs. Children come out of kindergarten, and some children have IEPs. Most of our work, we have a preschool where children are identified with IEPs. In kindergarten, children are identified with IEPs. And then, having been the elementary principal, students go into first grade, and they begin, again, kindergarten, first and second grade, to learn how to read. And so the IEP development in first and second grade is a whole nother cycle of identifying students and testing students. What's happened historically in the French immersion, students who have occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech are in the French immersion program, and there are a few children who have had IEPs. But again, to go through the IEP process, those are standardized tests, and several of them are around reading. And the reading is in English, and these students are being taught how to read in French. And so my experience, again, working with the French immersion program, is that when students learn how to read in English in the third grade, these students are given in, again, they're worked with the reading specialists that we have in the French immersion program, but they're given the testing after they begin to read in the third grade in English, in their formal reading instruction.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-up to that? So one of the things that happens is that if you take your child who might have a learning challenge to a local hospital to be evaluated, 9 times out of 10, I can guarantee you that they will say, take them out of French immersion program, irregardless of what the learning disability will be, just from getting your child tested. I don't think that's fair to kids in the French immersion program for us not to be able to afford to have some support around some of the learning disabilities, right? It's not fair to those children to be in French immersion without, I'm looking at you like you're going to answer that, and that's not fair. I'm looking over here. Right, sorry, Dr. Dwyer. So I've always thought, is there a way for us to increase support, assessment, whatever, to children who might have some learning challenges? On an IEP, obviously, we need to do legally, because I do know of parents who have been coached out of French immersion because their child has, both by their pediatrician, the hospital who evaluated them, and by the program.
Well, they haven't been coached out by this superintendent or anyone that answers to me that understands the French immersion and the English program. And for children who are in the French immersion program, over the years, we've used our resources, and there have been sometimes instructional aides in the French immersion classes, and other times we've had a reading specialist service the children. And we've found over the years that the best model is the model we have now. We have a reading specialist who travels across the district and, working with the French immersion first and second grade teachers, identifies children who have reading needs. And in small groups, the reading specialist in the French immersion program, who speaks French, provides those services in French. Mr. Phelan, Dr. Fisher, and I meet with this person, and again, just like everybody who has in the audience who has a first and second grader, and those of us who are educators understand, when we sit down with this individual, the groups change. You know, the first 3 to 4 months of first grade are very different than the last 3 to 4 months of first grade. And so sometimes children need assistance, and then they start to master and break the code. They might have comprehension issues. They might have phonics issues. Again, they have needs in different areas. And in the French immersion program, that's how we've been providing the services in first and second grade to across the district. Again, children in special education who come out of kindergarten, but again, when the tests are standardized, you're putting the child at a disadvantage when the test is in English and their instruction is in French.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add one thing? That bottom right-hand number, 244.3, that's based on only 8 students. So to go back to Member Kelly's comment that, you know, this isn't a completely thorough analysis looking at the distribution of scores. So it's only 5.6% of the students in French for that year are or have IEPs.
What's the number for English?
25%. 36 out of 147.
Ms. Kelly.
Do you have more?
Go ahead. I feel
I
like
guess,
I'm hogging the show.
I just wanted to bring this back to student assignment,
Yeah.
classroom assignment. If we did not have parental choice of programs, how would we create classrooms for every grade at the elementary level?
Again, bringing back to the recommendation, we look at balancing classrooms. We look at all of the issues, all of the demographics, gender, IEPs. We look to create, again, if you had 4 English or 4 classrooms and we weren't dealing with French immersion, you'd look at having 4 class sizes that were all equal, Mrs. Kelly. Whether it be four classes of 20 students in each class, or 4 students of 25 in each class.
Right, so that's the class size, which obviously is an issue with regard to French immersion right now, because 26 is just ridiculous at grade 1. But with the demographics, there's also the ability to distribute that more equitably, so that a teacher has the ability to meet the needs of all the children in their classroom, rather than having a very unbalanced situation, which I think, again, not to ask for more information, but we need to know what the demographics are for all of these classes. So as we look to 12 and 13, what is the breakout of these classrooms? Because I think that will give us some concrete data with which to say we need to do something that creates more balance. It's not just how many students are in the French program, it's what are the classrooms that are being created as a result of it. And again, I think we need to get to that level of data for us to be able to make informed decisions as to how to go forward with any changes.
We could give you that data, but I think that everyone understands when the percentage gets to be 66% children in the French immersion program and in the English program 33%, that's going to limit our ability to create balanced classrooms.
Without a doubt, but I would argue that the solution to this problem needs to understand the depth of the problem. And until we understand that, as you and I have had conversations, I'm thinking that perhaps not only do we have to have caps, but we also have to differentiate how many boys and girls are in classrooms. I think that that may be something we need to go to if the ultimate solution to this issue is creating much more balanced classrooms than what we have now. And I don't feel I could make any informed decision on that unless I have what the demographics are.
The question is Bagley-Jones.
And this is again directed more at Superintendent Gormley. I know we've talked about this before, but it would be great, and the World Language Committee talked about this, but with Dr. Fisher here, it would be great to be able to collect data on why kids leave the French immersion program before they go to Pierce, because we do know historically that our sizes have always gone down as kids go from grade 1 through grade 5. You know, are there I've asked this before, are there exit interviews? Did teachers make the recommendations to parents, to kids? And I'd really like to know why they leave, because then because the English kids are impacted by that, right? Because they go from the French immersion program into the English class, or there are things that we could be doing or not doing. I don't know. I would just like to know. And
We could
also
give
the
you
grade
that data
3
too.
And I don't mean tomorrow, and I don't mean, but just to bring that up, and also grade 3 retention. That's a big year for retention, I believe, because it's a big, or it used to be a big leap to grade 4.
It's not.
Do we have years? What does our retention look like in the different years?
We can show you that.
I mean, and I'm not trying to make more work for
No.
you.
And it's minimal and non-existent in grade 3.
Okay.
And this is a very important fact when we were communicating with parents who were choosing French immersion. French immersion is a commitment for 5 years. And so we have informational meetings, we have kindergarten teachers, we have principals who speak with parents, we open up our schools for tours, and so we have the data on anyone who has left the French immersion and gone into the English, because there's a tremendous amount of discussion before that ever happens. We urge parents to understand, and guardians, they're making a 5-year commitment. And I'm aware, and I have to approve every student who leaves the French immersion program and goes into the English. And so we work very, very hard. If parents didn't understand, that's why we do all of this work explaining French immersion, because, again, it's a commitment, and we don't expect students to leave the French immersion to go into the English program.
You know, Dr.
Well, if I might, Mrs. Kelly, for mere reasons, sometimes we'll get to October and families didn't understand that it's 100% French.
Which is definitely one component, but I would be very troubled that we were giving parents who know their children best a hard time and telling them that we wouldn't want them taking them out of the French program. If they have a student that is in tears every single day, I can't imagine that we would fight them on taking them out of a French immersion program.
We want, again,
I mean, it's great to
my
say in
experience
theory.
is if they're crying in French immersion, they're going to be crying in English. And so we try to work with parents so that they understand the program, they work with the teacher, and again, they give they're fully educated when they make their choice.
Okay, here, this, you know, these, I guess these kinds of discussions are very disturbing to me. Our parents, I mean, I'm sure there are many parents out there who are educators and are very well informed about making decisions like this. I feel very troubled as a system that we would say parents who perhaps have no experience with a foreign language or whatever, but how it's sold is very inviting, and maybe everyone in the neighborhood goes in. I'm very troubled that we're saying to them, your commitment was 5 years, don't even dare ask to get out. That is very, very troubling to me. And I think what we need to take into consideration is that there is an impact when that child goes into English, if that's ultimately what happens. There's not only an impact on the classroom it goes into, but there's also an impact on that child. That is traumatic. And for us as the educational community to not understand that, to not put that on the table, to not describe it at every informational meeting, then we're not doing a service to our parents and our kids. I just find that...
Are you saying that, did you say that we should better explain when, that if they were able to leave the French immersion?
Certainly better explain that, number one, guess what? It does happen, okay? But number two, your parents, you're the ones who, I don't know how we can make
Well,
those
I have to tell you, a tremendous amount of work is done with classroom teachers, principals, guidance counselors, the staff at the schools around these decisions.
And I guess I would say to you, it's parental decision, and if we're fighting them on it, I think that's a problem.
Well, I didn't use the word fight. What I used the word, we inform them, we work with them, and again, ultimately, it is their decision, but we have all of these years of experience, and we try to help them in their decision-making.
Bagley Jones.
Sorry. We talked about this on World Language Committee as well. Maybe that's why I have all these questions. But I know that when I made the decision in grade 1 for my 18-and-a-half-year-old to put him into the French immersion program, I really didn't have a clue what I was doing, and I work in education. I really didn't know. I was like, well, that sounds good. And he was a kid who learned very well in that setting. But how could I have gotten, I'm looking at you, I'm sorry, Dr. Dry, how could I have gotten better information as a parent as to what I should be looking for? And I'll tell you, the grade 1 French teacher, soon after the school year started, sent home a listing of multiple intelligences for you to rate your own child on the way your child learns. And I was like, oh, phew, my child's an auditory learner. I guess he's in the right program. But I didn't realize that. And I went to all the grade 1 information nights. I mean, they did a great job. But I, as a parent, didn't get how to best assess my child for placement into the French immersion program. It was kind of like, okay. And I just think we could maybe, with Dr. Fisher here, get an idea of some other things, I don't mean tonight, but in the system, get an idea of, are there ways we could help parents better assess? Because it's now, I hear from a lot of parents, well, the playground folks, which I went by the playground things too, I still do, just different playgrounds, that you're hearing other parents, oh, the French program is better. Well, you know what? It's not. It's an equal program to our English program. It's just got some different unique features. So is there a way that we can look at how we can better help parents assess their own child, to Mary Kelly's point and to Superintendent's point? We want kids in the program that it's a right program for them. But we don't have a formal assessment. So just thinking about the multiple intelligences, even if we could do something like, I don't know, but something to think about for program development.
Sure.
I'd like to go back to the data presentation for a moment, if that's okay. So I'm looking at slides 39 and 40. Well, maybe just 40. So when we look at this data, this was the 5th grade data, correct? Oh, sorry. It's actually 40 is the one I wanted, I'm sorry.
Yeah, all set.
40?
So when we look at this, and what I'm seeing is that males in both French immersion and English score approximately the same in ELA. And when you go to math, there is a little greater
Well,
discrepancy.
it's not just males. They are, because of the way the data
Right, I'm
are
sorry.
coded, like female is 0, male is 1, whatever
Right,
way
so
they're
it's
coded.
male, non-minority,
It's a male,
non-IEP.
non-minority, non-low income, non-IEP.
Okay. And so that's where you were talking apples to apples, these students
Correct.
score the same. And on the math, on number 40, slide 42, there's a little bit more discrepancy for some years, but certainly in the last year, it's better. And in some of the previous years, they were very close. And that's with the same subgroup, correct? Males, non-minority, non-IEP.
Correct.
So if you were to look at some of those other demographics, obviously, it's time prohibitive, but would you venture a guess to say what that data would look like as well? Would you, like if you were to take males, minorities,
Okay.
non-IEP, what would be the variables, approximately, or is that impossible to
Okay.
even?
No, it's not impossible. Just to be clear, this analysis is a type of prediction model where you control for gender, you control for minority status, you control for low-income status and IEP status, and then you look at the corrected differences, essentially. You'll often hear accounting for gender, the difference disappears. It's like, well, it's actually physically, in the physical world, impossible to account for gender differences, but statistically you can control for them, and that's essentially what's been done here. I would suspect that there are other unmeasured characteristics. There may be other, as I said, the parental pieces. There may be, in those years perhaps, there may have been slightly different motivators for being in one program versus another. I'm not sure what
I
might have
wasn't
been
asking that so much as if we were to break it out demographically by other groups than just male. Do you think that they would be as relatively close as they are?
Yeah, I think I think that the question is, this is a snapshot of one particular
Right.
choice.
Right.
And so I think she's asking, did you look at all the various different choices, and do we have somehow a summative result to that, or did you just choose particular demographics to do the
Okay.
analysis on?
Right. With this type of analysis, what you're doing, it's, I guess it is misleading to say that it's males, non-minority, no IEP, not low income, because what you're doing is, because of the way the analyses are done, you're accounting for gender. You're accounting for IEP status, and it just so happens that they are what you would call a reference group, which is why male, non-minority, non-IEP, and non-low income are listed up there. Right? So it's all, my response would be that it's already in that analysis to have taken care of all of the other demographics. What I could do is remove some of the controls, basically, and say, okay, is there a difference after we control for just gender and just IEP status?
That's where I'm going.
Okay. Yes.
And
Yes.
females as well.
Exactly. Well, no, female is already in there because it's a comparison.
Opposite of this, okay.
Opposite of male. Yeah.
I get it.
Okay.
Thank you.
And so on that point, what effect does average have on that analysis? we talked earlier about how averages can be misleading in terms of what they're presenting. So is there any way to look at sort of what the span is?
Okay, so what well, not really, because you've got a prediction model where you are looking at the actual difference. So for example, if I were to just compare the two programs and just get the average in one program, the average in the French program, the average in the English program for 2005, 2006, and were just to calculate a simple average, it would be 4.6. When I do this prediction model, the average, the number that I get is also 4.6. However, when I add in other demographic characteristics, depending on the demographic characteristics that I add in, that difference will either be 4.6 or 2.1, or as we see here, 0.1, depending on what I add in. If in fact I added in a lot, it could actually go negative, right? If I added in enough to explain away all of the differences, the difference could be negative, where in fact it looks like the English students are outperforming the French students after controlling for these. So it's a function of how good your prediction model is in explaining the difference between the two groups.
So what tells a prediction model what to do or how to use the data?
Right.
Is that determined by you, or it's a given, I mean, is prediction model something that's used everywhere?
Yeah,
and
it is.
therefore
It's called regression analysis. It's one of our workhorses of applied statistics. It is, to go back to what you were saying, how do you decide what goes in? Well, we only have, the administration, every school district only has a certain amount of data available. And usually what we do is we look at every possible piece of data that is available to us, understanding that there are other unmeasured things that should be in the model but aren't in the model because we don't have that data. It's not an exact science, unfortunately. If it were an exact science, we wouldn't be here.
I think part of it is, but when you see a thing like this, it's like, oh, well, she only looked at male, non-minority, non-IEP, not low income. She didn't look at anyone else.
Right.
And that's not exactly what the regression model does. I mean, this is a snapshot, but the regression model takes into account the various different features. It's
The opposite.
It's not that we just ignored everybody else and looked at this one little tiny subgroup, which, you have two choices for each of those, so it's not just one,
Right.
one of the 16 possible subgroups that was looked at, and the other 15 were ignored.
And my apologies, the title is misleading there.
And for 6 years to look at the fifth graders, that is a tremendous amount of data that you looked at.
Yeah. I mean, you can do it in batches, but it's, there are many different ways. I mean, there's even a textbook that some of us use called How to Lie with Statistics. It's very, very easy to obfuscate the truth with whether you talk about ranges or standard deviations or variances or not. So my goal here was to try to present a picture that would be understandable without too much technical detail or too much methodological sort of, jargon about what I was doing.
And with a lot of honesty, which we know you have used. I just wanted to not follow up, but go back to, at the beginning of your presentation on slides 22 and 23, you were comparing Milton with the statewide standards or statewide averages.
Yep.
And I think it might have been interesting to just carry that forward a little bit as you, in the, slide 24 and 26, where you broke it out, French, English, and Milton. It would have been, I think, fun to see that state line continue there, because in my projections that I've done, just in carrying the numbers forward, in every single year, in every single, both math and ELA, with one exception, both French and English were higher. I mean, higher than the state
That is true, and I will tell you that that particular slide went in and out of my presentation 3 times. Because it was very noisy looking. Anybody you know, you can go back and compare the two. You know, the percentages are right there. You can easily extrapolate to what they would be.
Which I did.
Right. But I felt like it was too noisy to put in. It was confusing. I will tell you, on the English language arts side, only in 1 year was the English program lower than the state average, and I believe that was in 2005, 2006.
Mm-hmm.
Every other year, the average was higher. The average in the English program was higher than the state average.
And both, and in math,
in mathematics, it was higher all across.
Thank you.
Ms. Kelly?
So just on that point, I try and bring this up every time we talk about comparing our performance to state average. I believe we're the second, best community to be living in the United States. We should have a different standard. And just being better than state average, although it's something to recognize, is really not where we should be aspiring to be. And I think if we lose sight of that, perhaps our solution to our problems here may not be reaching for the star that we should be reaching for. So I guess I would just throw that out there.
I wasn't pretending to say, Mrs. Kelly, that that's where we should aspire to be. I was just making note of data that was begun in the analysis at the beginning and suggesting it could be carried
I appreciate that, but it seems like at least I bring this topic up every year, and yet we still have not established where we want to be. And I think unless we establish where we want to be, we won't attain it. I guess that's my point for bringing it up.
And for the viewing audience, this is an issue that we talk about in the budget, and we talk about it achievement-wise. Again, budget-wise, we compare ourselves. There was a strategic plan, and not to belabor this, and a number of issues were used to compare Milton to 10 or 12 other communities. And when we do our work internally, we look at districts that have the same number of students. Then we look at districts that might have the same percentage of special ed students. We look at student neighboring communities. We look at communities we compete with. And so to Mrs. Kelly's point, looking at MCAS scores to finally determine a group that we want to compare ourselves to. But the state has really provided us now with that data in the growth data. And so we want to, we use ourselves as the example, and for every single student, every single grade, every single school, we want to provide that growth data that that proves that we're moving the entire district ahead, and that no child is being left behind.
Is it okay if I just give one piece of advice on that? I would recommend that you don't set goals for MCAS scores. I would suggest that you set goals for curriculum, teaching, learning, excellence, right? MCAS scores are just an outcome for excellence in teaching and learning. If you set goals according to MCAS scores and that, what you're going to do is narrow the curriculum, tie teachers' hands and what they can or can't cover in classes. So it's just something that you've got to be careful of.
Right.
And I know you're aware of that.
And I would never say, what's the score we want to attain?
Yeah, right.
I would say, Sharon, for instance, says they want to be the best public school system in the state. I would love to have that goal as a system, right? So those are the types of things I'm talking about. So that when we compare ourselves, looking at outcomes, we will use a cohort that's in the top of the state and
You're right,
strive
and
to achieve that.
the trick would be to operationalize
Correct.
best,
Correct.
Right.
using inputs and not outputs.
Yes.
Some of the data we've seen tonight actually cuts both ways on that. When we said the SAT scores were 1550 versus the national average of 1500, well, that doesn't sound like a huge uptick over the national average, but 99% of our students take the SATs and 50% nationally take the SATs. So we're comparing ourselves to the top half of the students nationwide, all of our kids against the top half nationwide, and we're outperforming them. So it cuts both ways looking at the state average. You say, well, we should be better than the state average on MCAS. Yeah, well, we should. But when you start comparing things like SATs, because of the way the demographics are so very different nationally with SATs, for instance, versus our students with SATs, It actually works against us in that sense, but we still outperform them in spite of the fact, we're looking at a completely different cohort than nationwide would be looking.
And to that point, we've begun to get this year's data back, and we look to every single grade, every single discipline, our SATs, our advanced placement scores, that the percentage of students and all of our achievement indicators are improving.
Glenn?
Yes.
This is, again, a little bit off the topic, but since we're on it, if I can just ask Superintendent Gormley, I know that we heard something about the gender. Since we are in July, right, we're almost in August and school starts soon, we do have some classes where we're not very well balanced, and is there some creative approaches with scheduling around whatever that we can try to integrate our kids a little bit better between the two programs? I mean, September's coming and we've got some classes that are fairly imbalanced.
Well, a few issues, and these parents are all involved in kindergarten and first grade. We made several attempts to examine one. I'll address the Cunningham issue. I sent a letter out one more time reiterating all the aspects of French immersion, asking parents and guardians to be sure about their choice. And then we looked at the Cunningham single strand, and we will get back to all of the parents tomorrow with the final decision on that. We are going to run one strand. We only have enough students in the English program at the Cunningham to have one English strand. And so the plan was to take, as the parent indicated, to take the two Collicott first grades and the Cunningham first grades and to integrate those students. We're watching the numbers and the registrations, and again, school committee members and parents had asked, could you have a Collicott class, a Cunningham class, and then a mixed Collicott-Cunningham class, as we've done before in grades 3, 4, and 5. There aren't enough children. If we left a Cunningham class, there would only be 2 or 3 children who would go into that mixed class. So right now, we're watching the registrations district-wide. At the Glover, where we need to increase the number of girls in that first grade, we have 2 options. One, we had discussed internally looking at the balance of girls and boys in the other 3 schools, Collicott, Cunningham, and Tucker, looking at students, families that lived on the border who had girls, and looking to increase the number of girls at the Glover. We decided internally, again, looking at the number of new registrations that Mr. Phelan brought to our attention last year in the first grade, to watch the registrations. And again, every day we watch the registrations to see if more girls move in and girls would be put into the Glover first grade. So this is really, this first grade moving ahead, we're really working on it daily, examining all of the options. So those are the creative ideas that we've had. But we also, when I met with the leadership team, again, the principals are very conscious about gender balance in their own schools. And so we're going to watch the registrations. Indications are, from the last 2 years, the number of first graders who come in before the end of August, and really hold off our decision-making until mid-August.
Can I just ask a follow-up question to that? And I know that you guys have done everything you can to balance, and you'll continue to do that. I was thinking of, like when my girl was in English at grade 5, Collicott, Mrs. McIntyre did science for the other French. They switched classes, but they did it as a block. Sure. Couldn't we take half of French, half of English, put them in art or gym, and the other half, I mean, it's a pain, but we're sort of in an urgent situation. Mm-hmm. And it's a pain, meaning it's a lot of time and it's a lot of figuring out. You've got a month before school, but can't we better integrate kids more socially, looking at things like gender or race or whatever the issues are? And I know that's a lot of work to put on the principals and on you at this point, but we're almost in September, I hate to say.
Well, for the public to know, we do balance that out in 5th grade, whereby 70% of every child's day, the program students are put together and assigned to their classes without regard to program. And then for the last 30% of the day, they will go to their program-specific teacher for curriculum in either French or in English in Spanish. We piloted that in fourth grade a few years back, and we found that the fifth grade was the best place to take advantage of that integration of program, so we could have students begin to take classes with one another to prepare for middle school, to ensure that the English and the math that was being taught in English could be then taught to every child in a mixed setting, so we could balance the classes around all these demographics, as Member Kelly had spoke to earlier, around how we can reorganize the students, not by program. In first grade, there are limited opportunities, or in second grade, because the students are in French all day and speaking French all day, as in English is the same. The times where they go for phys ed or art or, say, music, because we only have one teacher available at a time, it doesn't give us the ability, we'd have to have two classes in there at a time. So yes, we will absolutely look at it. We would love to be creative, to create more opportunity for our students to be balanced, but there are built-in challenges, but your point is well taken.
And if I might add one more note to that, Mr. Phelan suggested that we try to integrate the classes at fourth grade. And there's a reason why elementary school children, and the people in the audience and I understand this, have one teacher. We found out that in the fourth grade, when you ask fourth graders to change classes, you were losing valuable instructional time. So there's a reason at the elementary school why children are in a class and they have the same teacher all year, and all day and all year. And so the model in fifth grade, we've perfected the 30%, 70% of the day, all of the children are integrated.
Thank you.
Anything else from the committee? We have a list of questions and tasks that we have to get to, and we'll take, this will become an ongoing agenda item, obviously, at our meetings. As I said earlier, we're not taking a vote on this tonight. We have still questions unanswered, so we will deal with some of this again at our next meeting, which is in 2 weeks. And then we'll keep moving forward with this. We have to get ourselves a timeline here if we have a decision made for the 12-13 year, 13-14 year, sooner rather than later, because as parents are in kindergarten now, they want to know what's happening. So we have a fairly short timeline for ourselves, but it's not reasonable to make a decision absent getting some of the questions we still have answered. So I think that the object is to move this along as expeditiously as possible, but still trying to get as many questions as we can get answered, taken care of. Ms. Kelly?
Just wondering if we can establish a timeline. I think there are definitely questions to be answered, but I think if we don't set a timeline, we might keep on pushing this off because it's not the pleasantest of experiences. But I wonder if the administration might come up with a recommendation in terms of when we might come to a decision. I mean, ultimately, the administration has presented a recommendation.
Right.
Right.
There are details within the recommendation that need to be worked out and I think presented to the school committee as to how does that work, whatever your recommendation is. And then I think we will need some time to digest what the recommendation is, hear from the community, and then come to a final decision. But that's a process that I think we need to at least establish a timeline. Whether we meet it or not is a whole other story, but at least put something down on paper.
In our discussions, we've been talking at least informally among ourselves that, this is something for early fall, at the latest. I mean, we have to get a reasonable something in place at the beginning of the school year. This is not something that can drag on into November, December, January, February. That's way too late. I mean, we have to have some idea where we're going much sooner than later. Ms. Magley-Jones. Oh.
If I just might add, for the public to understand and the viewing audience, when the school committee asks questions, sometimes we respond at the next meeting publicly, but all of the questions the school committee asks we always respond to, and we give them a folder. And if the answers should be public, we talk about it. If it was information that they wanted as an FYI, we provide it to all school committee members. We'll take every question that was asked tonight by committee members, and we'll answer them during the superintendent's report at our next meeting. And I don't know how you want to handle questions that were presented through Citizen Speak and Citizen Speak that follows. Individual questions that parents or guardians want to email me, I'll respond to. I'll CC the school committee on all of the answers.
Can I just ask a favor? When we talk about all the different levels of capping, like, for example, the one where you said, if you move into town this summer and you want French immersion, you can't. It would be helpful to have the school years attached every time we talk about when you're talking about capping. Because I've gotten some emails from parents who thought this vote tonight was for their child September 1st. So there's some confusion, I think, out there. At least I'm getting some confusion from people.
Oh, well, I mean, people are saying that the method you're going to use for the lottery isn't right. So there is no method we're going to use for the lottery. That was for a different purpose. I mean, if there's going to be a cap and there's going to be a lottery, we're going to have to design it.
Right.
I mean, obviously, the same methodology isn't going to work because that was for a completely different purpose. That was to decide, you know, which school you were going to be in, not whether you were going to be in a program. I mean, there's all sorts of different issues there. So we've got a lot of work to do. We've got to back up very much to a earlier ground in the whole process to try to figure out what is the solution, if, you know, to the problem going down that road. I mean, there's an awful lot of work to be done here, and not much time to do it.
I'm wondering if there's a way that we can collect the questions that parents and family and community members might have. Obviously, we have school to start in 6 weeks, so we can't expect that the administration will be able to answer every single solitary question, but it seems even just from the emails that we get that there's a sense of, you know, certain questions that are out there. So if there's a way in which we could, you know, sometimes we do Q&As that we put up and keep that kind of running, if that would be possible and not too much work, because this is very important to everyone, but right now you are very much engaged in getting school ready for opening, and I understand that. So being respectful of both sides, trying to hear the questions and be responsive, that would be helpful.
That would facilitate our time. We'll put the Q&A on the web and then have the running answers to the questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the issue with emailing the school committee is we can easily hit reply all and run afoul of the open meeting law, so we have to be careful about that. But if we had an address at which we could people could send questions, and we could have them posted in sort of a Q&A fashion, you know, sort of the equivalent of some school departments are trying to figure out school committee blogs, and they're almost entirely illegal because of the open meeting law. So we just need some way to be able to direct questions in without getting into deliberation.
We'll decide on an email address, and we'll put that on the front of the web tomorrow.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to, on behalf of the Milton Public Schools, thank Dr. Laura O'Dwyer, and looking out at the audience, they were outstanding, as the school committee was outstanding students. You did a phenomenal job, and again, the school committee asked to see the data. It's very valuable, and for you giving your time and your expertise and the way that you framed the information was outstanding.
It really was.
Thank you.
Mr. Walker? On the question of a timeline, I actually asked the question at the June meeting that Ms. Kelly asked this evening, which is that the administration be prepared to present a timeline this evening for how we would proceed. So, and I saw a draft, so I'm under the impression that that is something that the administration is prepared to talk about this evening. Is that correct?
Mr. Phelan's going to address that.
Per the school committee request, we did prepare a generic timeline that we did not share tonight because we didn't want to assume that we could dictate when the school committee would vote. But the timeline that we generically put forward internally was that we have our grade 1 night starting backwards in January, February. We would like to inform our parents in advance of that as much as we could. So we had hoped to present in June, which we did. We had, were asked for more information to present tonight, which we did. We would like to be able to have the dialogue with the school committee in September, so we could have a plan moving forward whether or not we are going to cap or not in September. Because as Member Pavlicek mentioned, the work after that is that if in fact there is a vote to cap, then the how to cap conversation would need to take place, and we'd like to do that kind of work, so then we could present that to the folks as well early in the fall, giving them at least a 3 to 4 month period before we do our grade 1 presentation, and then we don't ask for people to sign up for French or English until maybe March. So earlier in fall, the better, not wanting to assume that we can determine when the vote would take place, but we did present and make a recommendation in June after analyzing information in April. We did present again tonight with additional information. We'll provide as many answers to as many questions as we receive, and would like to see that conversation and decided in September. If in fact there will be a cap or not. If in fact it is a yes vote to cap, we would like some time to put together with some support from outside folks, hopefully, what that capping would look like for it to be equitable and fair and clear to our families and our community, to present that and have it prepared in late fall in preparation for our February, March grade 1 night, and our families having to decide in March and April. So that would be the rough timeline verbally.
That's helpful, thanks.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, again, thank you to Dr. O'Dwyer for enormous amount of work done. I was here last Monday at 8:30 in the morning, and she was here, and then I came back at 4:30, and she was still here. And so, an incredible amount of work done.
Very briefly.
Really?
Briefly.
We do have other agenda items, so let's...
First, I'm
Can I
sure...
make a suggestion?
Yep.
Of course.
That we move to citizen speak. We have had parents now waiting 2 hours, and we've finished our discussion. So how about if we do citizen speak now?
That's amenable
Sounds
to the
good.
committee?
Sure.
Okay. So, we'll amend the agenda to bring citizens speak up here at this point again. Thank you. I will start with people who passed the first time, and then we have a few people who have added on since. Again, so we're not here all night, I would please encourage you to keep it to 3 minutes. I won't cut it at 30 minutes because there aren't that many people. We should be able to get this done in a reasonable amount of time, and I just assume not cut people off from having their say to ask any questions or make any statements they'd like to make. So, with that, we will start again back at the beginning with people who had deferred, and then we'll move on to people who've added their names since. So first, James Mulligan.
All right, my wife asked a couple questions.
Dare I say no to that?
Explain that you don't answer.
I'll politely ask.
I'd like to go home tonight.
Thank you. Actually, thank you, Dr. O'Dwyer, for that presentation. I thought it was really helpful, and my questions were more directed to just a couple questions I had on that. Did you have the R-squared for the prediction model? I just was curious how much it predicted, if you could share that with us.
I'd appreciate if you ask the questions to us.
Oh,
all
I'm
right?
sorry.
Because we can ask, I really don't want to get into discussion with Dr. O'Dwyer here. She's done her job. If you give us the questions, we'll do our best to get answers back, again, as a group to everybody, rather than open this up into a discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So, go right.
Sure. I was hoping that we could find out what the R-squared was to determine how good the model was at predicting and explaining the differences. And I was also hoping to know if there was a scatter plot, if it controlled for any outliers, and if there were, that might give a better idea if there were any averages skewing any of the data. And my other request would just be, I thought the presentation was really helpful, but I also thought it would be really helpful if, I know the presentation is going to be on the website tomorrow, if you can also, for those of us who are kind of detail-oriented people, put the regression analyses, that's the underlying data that was relied on to present the PowerPoint up there as well, so we could review that, I would appreciate it. Because I think one of the things that, I've heard throughout the process tonight, and I think is really important, is that as parents, the importance of public communication and keeping everything open so that there's no kind of, oh gee, what's going on, we don't know. The more information we have as parents, the better equipped we are to make decisions, and I think that's really important, obviously, when we're considering our children's future.
You just say that we will put up the PowerPoint tomorrow of further data that we have to collect. I can't guarantee we'll be up tomorrow morning, and we have, but we will try to get this stuff up as quickly as possible. All right.
I can see why you wanted your wife to ask those questions.
I was going to say that too, but I didn't do it.
Tara McCarthy.
One of my things was mentioned briefly, so I'm giving my son a Thank you. I appreciate it a lot.
My name is Beverly Ross Denny, and I live at 107 Columbine Road, and I have just a couple brief points. One, I'm glad to see that the analysis was able to control for some of the differences in the 5th grade, but as a mother of 2 black boys, my kids are that gap. So we have to figure out what it is that's causing that so that it doesn't at least bring fear to people like myself. But the other reason why I wanted to come up was to address the issue of demand in the English program. And I've been aware of this program called International Baccalaureate that would work very well with the English and Spanish program. And I'm hoping that it's something that we can look into to increase the demand for English without, I'm getting upset. Anyways, not upset. I'm excited because I actually think this might be a way to increase the demand for the English program. I did research on it years ago at the secondary level, and the MCAS scores of the schools in Massachusetts implementing it were outstanding. And they were able to work with average students. IB was started years ago for the children of diplomats when they were traveling overseas and has since gone into many public school systems. And it's worth all of you looking at it, ibo.org, and see for yourself what it can do. I actually was looking, when I was initially moving out of state, looked at Georgia and specifically looked at test scores. And the school that I found at the elementary level with some of the highest test scores was an IB elementary school. So I hope that the school committee looks into it realistically as another viable option, and I'd be more than happy to volunteer my time to do that research.
We'll take you up on that. Thank you.
Stephen Howard.
Good evening. Stephen Howard, twin residing at 22 Highfield Circle. My wife and I moved here 4 years ago now, and believe it or not, we planned our move to Milton 2 years ahead of time because of the French immersion program. We are a special case in as much as we are a French-speaking family, and believe it or not, I think we got here the first time that there was a lottery. We didn't make the first cut. Another class was implemented, we didn't make the second cut. We decided that our son should go to Cunningham in the English section because we didn't want him to change school a 4th time in 4 years. That was our choice. We weren't happy with the cap, with the lottery, because the lottery is in effect a cap. We were fortunate enough that 3 days before school started, I believe it was Mr. Phelan called us and said, some parents changed their mind. Moving out of town, your son can get in the French program. That was the past. Just to say on top of that, that as a French-speaking person, I am delighted with the program, and I think that what is done in the program is amazing. I have participated with some of the teachers on math games and other things, and I am extremely impressed by what the kids do at the end of 2nd grade, really. And I think I would like to commend all the teachers that participate in it. Having said that, I think that the problem we have is, and I walk my kids to school every morning and talk to a lot of parents, I think, again, we're having people not choose the English program for the wrong reasons, rather than choosing the French program for the right reasons. This has been said a number of times tonight. I was very happy to see the study. I think it explains a lot of things. I think you're going to have a very hard job, though, explaining it to people outside that were not in this room tonight. And I think it is extremely important to get it out to the press properly, because we can take any one slide of that presentation and skew the interpretation. But again, I would encourage the committee and the administration to see what can be done to make, again, the English program more attractive. You know, I don't think you will have a choice. We will have to cap the French program at one point or another. It's just a matter of practicality. But as the father of a 4-year-old that will hopefully go to the French immersion program in 2 more years, you know, we'll look forward to see what's being done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Peter Culhane.
Good evening. Because my children have been through the school system, I don't have a horse in this race. So I think what I'm going to say, I can say disinterestedly. And my position is strengthened by what I've heard from Professor O'Dwyer. I came here to urge you to do something which apparently hasn't even crossed your mind, and that's to abolish the English-only program. This is the perfect opportunity. The people have chosen 2-to-1. It works, and with reference to the 5th grade data, which I think is better because by the time the MCAS is administered, the student has completed 90 to 95% of his elementary school years. Before adjustments are made, it's clear the French immersion students perform statistically significantly better academically than the English-only students. Dr. O'Dwyer then adjusted by separating out minorities and low income. They certainly constitute, and IEPs. Doesn't it logically follow that the best thing for the minorities and the low-income students to join the French immersion program? She made a very important point. Cognitively, she states, and she made this point emphatically, cognitively, minorities perform as well as non-minorities. Low-income perform as well as high-income or middle-income. Just by putting these students into the French program, you should improve their performance overall. As a general point, and all you have to do is Google something like, quote, effect of having students learn a French language on their academic performance, close quote. You'll find hundreds, thousands of studies and books that show that mastery of a foreign language at a young year improves overall academic performance. We have it here in Milton. For a quarter of a century, the system has proved itself. And I've heard a lot of different numbers about how many schools in America have a full-time immersion program. Ranges from 13 to 200. I'm not sure, but we certainly have one. But I've never heard of a public school system that mandates that every child master a foreign language. And that's something Milton could do to separate itself from every other public school system in the United States. Make it mandatory that every student leave 5th grade reading, writing, and speaking a foreign language fluently. It's being done for 2/3 of the students right now. Why don't we take those minority students and those low-income students and raise them up and put them in where they can perform just as well, according to Dr. O'Dwyer, as the French immersion students can. They're just as bright, just as talented. You have the program in place. The solution to your problem is to universalize the immersion program. It'll also do away with a lot of wasted time that takes place at the end of every year, and that is balancing classes, trying to figure out where to assign students because they've chosen French or English. Make it mandatory. Now, to those parents who feel very strongly about the English-only program, I'll say this. It's the 21st century. The English-only system is an antiquated system, and Milton should lead the way in the United States in seeing to it that unilingualism is a thing of the past. Bilingualism, trilingualism, etc. It's a path to the future. It concerns me that nobody at the table I'm staring at has come to the conclusion that maybe we should not hope that people choose English only, that the minorities and the low-income students continue to choose a program that's clearly inferior to the other program. A lot more data could be produced, as I'm sure Professor O'Dwyer would concede. It would be interesting, for example, to look at the SAT scores of those students who went through the immersion program and those students who went through the English program, adjusting, of course, for those students who leave in 9th grade for private schools. Don't complicate things. Simplify things. You can simplify things by going to a single program. It treats all children the same way, and all of these children who are now not benefiting from the immersion program, which has established itself as the superior program versus an inferior program. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Catherine Murphy.
Hi, I'm Catherine Murphy. I'm at 53 Center Lane. I have a daughter who will be in kindergarten this year, so I do have a horse in the race. And I have to say, this meeting has been incredibly enlightening. I think that one of the issues that someone just brought about communication is incredibly important. I had no idea until I attended this meeting what the ramifications were, what the issues were, what some of the real problems were in terms of class sizes and gender distribution. I still don't really understand what a role model student is, so I'll ask that question here and hope that that will be answered somewhere. And so I hope that this level of communication and openness can be just as well conveyed. I mean, obviously there's a group of interested people here at the meeting. I hope that somehow this can be conveyed to everybody. In the meantime, I think that that goes along with the outcome of the data that was shown, and I think that, and I want to talk positively, I think that what I took away from this is that there isn't really that much of a difference between these two great programs. So instead of rushing to a conclusion that is going to, I think, make a very forced and surprising outcome for parents if we do institute a cap starting in the 2013-2014 school year. And perhaps take some time to let this message sink in across the community and to try to maybe make a community mind shift towards not shying away from an English program. Now, I have to say, I'm one of those people who moved to Milton for French. I am the world's biggest Francophile. I lived in Paris. I studied French. To me, the opportunity for my children to study French, I thought, this must be the most amazing town. So I'm coming at this from a place of real interest in foreign languages and foreign cultures. I don't know anything about the English program. I don't care if it's better than the French program. I want my children to do French. How incredible. So I really would just urge you to both think about communication and timing. Again, even if the recommendations are made and the discussions are held and we get an answer in October and then the process of the lottery system is not implemented until hopefully not that much further in the fall, I still feel that gives the parents of the children who are going into the first grade very little time to decide, how am I going to react to this? Somebody brought it up earlier. You know, people move here well in advance and make decisions in schools, you know, well in advance. And I would just urge you to perhaps let everything that came out of this meeting, which again I think was very positive. Again, I have a much better sense as a new parent to the school system of the scope and the issues and the problems that are there. I would just urge you to let this sink in and to try to take some time to find a solution that is not going to prohibits students from attending a program they want to attend, but rather, in an organic way, even out the playing field. So thank you very much. And again, I want to thank Dr. O'Dwyer. That was an incredible amount of work, incredibly enlightening, and I learned a lot from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Brian Bunn. Okay. Next would be Eric Miller. He had to leave. Next would be Carol Seidman.
Just give me a minute for my phone to come up. I only had 15% left, and I wanted to read something off of it. Hello, good evening. I know it's late. My name is Carol Seidman. I live at 64 Pagoda Circle. I'm also the current vice chair of the Special Ed Parents Advisory Committee, which is called the PAC or the CPAC, depending on which town you live in. So in this moment, when my iPhone comes up, I will read a statement from the PAC on behalf of the PAC. And then I wouldn't mind asking a few questions just as a parent in the town. Just to give you a little background, I am a sign language interpreter and have a lot of knowledge and background regarding issues of bilingualism. I also have twin boys. One is in the French program and one is in the English program. So to say families choose, it's sort of interesting. I am a family and I've chose differently for each child depending on what I know about their strengths and what I think would be in their own best interest. I also think that it is very difficult for any parent to know in first grade whether or not their child will effectively participate in the French program. And that is for many, many reasons that we don't want to talk about here, but I just feel a strong need to say that the French immersion program is a fabulous program, and it is fabulously designed to meet the needs of certain learners and not others. So let me just bring up the letter. Literally, I'm down to 12%, so sorry. If you give me a minute. This letter was drafted for the PAC by Bernadette, and I'm sorry I don't know her last name, but I will find it here. Because the PAC is new, we were just elected, so, and we've only had one meeting, so we're not quite up and running in terms of being prepared in that way. So I will.
Last name is Bentley, right?
Yes, Bernadette Bentley.
I'm sorry, say that again? Her name is Bernadette?
Bentley.
Bentley, thank you, I do, thank you, but thank you. Good evening, it says. We are speaking here tonight as board members of the Milton PAC, the Milton Parents Advisory Council. As you know, it is an organization mandated by state law. I'm going to skip a little bit, and so that, and you can get the letter. We'll submit the letter in full, but due to time, I don't want to go on and on. But so there seems to be 4 issues that the PAC are concerned about in relationship to the decisions coming up regarding the program. One is the district's lack of adherence to its policy on co-taught programming, leading to inappropriate learning environments for children on IEPs. And for those who don't know what an IEP is, it is an individual education plan, which doesn't say much if you don't know what an individual education plan is. Also, it is a plan designed for children who have a disability and it has to be a disability that is on a particular list. So you can have certain disabilities and not be on individual education plan. There are complications in how one establishes that. To answer the role model or the peer model question, there is, in the co-taught program, there is a concept called having peer models, or kids who don't have an IEP and meet other requirements in order for the co-taught program to be most effective. That's my understanding. And so I'll go back to the letter. The district's lack of adherence to the program design of the elementary schools and its subsequent effect on children with disabilities. The third thing is the message to parents by school administration and teachers about what type of students are appropriate for particular programs, and the public's impression that being a role model is unfair. So to the first issue, the district's lack of adherence to its policy on co-taught programming. The district's publication, Milton's Public School, A Parent Guide to Special Education, was, which is available on the miltonpublicschools.org, on page 12 and 13, says the Milton Public Schools co-taught program is a full inclusion program, specifically structured and staffed to meet the needs of a small number of students with special needs, while at the same time fostering relationships and leadership qualities in peer role models. The model or typical students are chosen and assigned by the principal. Criteria for the model students include students must have a history of a high degree of prior academic success. Priority will be given to students who have demonstrated strong age-appropriate academic, behavioral, social, attending, and leadership skills. I didn't write the letter, I'm just reading it. But I do think it has a lot of very good points, so if you bear with me, I appreciate it. The director's policy is crystal clear. Children who are role models must not only be handpicked by the principal, but they also must have a strong academic, behavioral, social, attention, and leadership skills. Although parents can request that children be placed in the class, the district's policy says that if a child does not meet this high level of performance, they are not to be given a slot. The success of the co-taught program, and consequently the district's compliance with federal education law, depends on the administration adherence to the written policy. However, this policy is not being followed due to the low number of children enrolling in the English program. Instead, the administration has repeatedly stated that they are waiting for new people to move into Milton and enroll their kids over the summer so that they can be placed in the English with complete disregard for whether the child meets the role model criteria or not. The administration attempts to ameliorate the outrageous program and gender imbalance at the Glover School, where more than 75% of the children entering first grade are slated to be in French, leaving just 5 girls and 20 boys in the English. The one girl on an IEP will have 2 peers in her class and will be in a classroom with almost 4-to-1 boy-to-girl ratio. This is a clear violation of the federal mandate for an appropriate education, not only for this child, but any child in the classroom, and must be fixed before school begins by adding principal-chosen role models and balancing the classes 50-50 by gender. Second, the district's lack of adherence to the program design of the Milton Public Schools. As stated on page 2 of the district's grade 1 presentation, given on March 21st, 2012, 2 English classes and 2 French classes at the Glover, 2 English classes and 2 French classes at Collicott, 2 English classes and 1 French class at Cunningham, and 2 English classes and 1 French class at Tucker. Because the district has not adhered to the above design, there are not enough students across the district to populate the English classes. leading not only to the dire situation outlined above at Glover, but the complete removal of English programming from the Cunningham School. As you know, Cunningham houses the district's substantially separate programs. So in order for the children in these classes to receive legally mandated inclusion, they have to leave their school and go to a different one. It does not matter whether the school is adjoining. The fact is that the administration has approved the dismantling of the English program at Cunningham, demonstrates a distressing disregard for the education of children of disabilities at the Cunningham and a lack of commitment to the English program in general. The good news is that it's not too late to fix this situation. By going back to the original design of the elementary schools as outlined above, you will resolve the lack of sufficient students to maintain appropriate English class co-taught programs and substantially separate programs, as you will also show your commitment to these programs.
Can we get this in?
Yes, I have it in
submitted to
writing.
We're well over the
I'm
3
so
minutes.
sorry,
I tried
yes.
to cut a little slack here,
I'm
but
sorry,
I mean, we're pushing 8 or 9
I'm
minutes.
sorry, it is a very long letter.
If you could email or submit it to us.
I will
so we
have,
can
I
read it.
will do that, absolutely.
And send us your questions on the...
I will also do that as well. I thank you for your time. I think the biggest issue, if I can sort of nail it down without reading it, is that we have grave concerns for the special ed programs in Milton and their effectiveness based on the redesign of the English and French program. And just an additional note, as a parent, the view of children who have IEPs or 504 programs or disabled in general as people who need, I'm trying to find the right word, but the role model seems to go one way. In other words, there doesn't seem to be an emphasis that my child or any other child on an IEP has something to give to your role models, only that the role models have something to give to them. And I challenge that intelligence and that approach. I do think that it is a concern also that the IEP and 504 process are ones that are not cooperative. They're a fight often, and therefore many parents who do have disabled children, but they don't choose an IEP if they have the money to supplement their children's education elsewhere, and then allow them in the French program. But many parents who are of low income or cannot afford that, then therefore cannot have their kids in the French program because the schools have not been willing to give access to disabled children to that program. Thank you.
Thank you. Hillary Farber.
Good evening. Hillary Farber, 9 Columbia Park. Thank you, and thank you for this analysis. A year ago, when we were deciding whether to put our son into the French immersion program or not, I looked high and low for some kind of data analysis of what is the success of the kids who are in the French immersion program? How do they do? What does it look like? Why aren't there any longitudinal studies? Why aren't master's students and PhD students in these wonderful education programs here in Massachusetts feasting on this kind of information? And why is Milton not sort of coordinating, getting analysis of this? The data was clearly there. And lo and behold, in just a month's time, under this somewhat of a crisis situation, you've been able to essentially hire somebody to do a relatively brief but important analysis. And I would suggest that That's fantastic, and it's been incredibly eye-opening, and I think many, many people will be talking about this for some time. But I also think that there's a much bigger story here. There's a lot more that we can mine from this data. Woman suggested this a few moments ago. You know, what do the SAT scores of these students look like? Where are they going to college? Who's getting the National Merit Scholarships? Who's getting into the AP classes? Like, tell us the story longitudinally over all this time. We have about 25 years worth of students that have gone through this program. I'm not sure actually what we're supposed to glean just from studying and analysis of fifth graders. I mean, I'm not an expert in this field, so I don't know, but it seems to me there's some limitations, and I think some child development people might say, we need more information to put this in a larger context. And so I would really just encourage the committee to think about making even more of an investment in understanding this program and these two programs in comparison before instituting, going to what I kind of think is going to be perceived quite clearly as a draconian step, and in some ways might be an effort at a quick fix, which may be necessary, maybe not. This may be an aberration. There may not be this kind of a disproportionate, in numbers over the coming years. It seems like this particular year showed something very different on those charts than in years past, and I'm not sure that this totally supports a trend. But there's clearly a problem that we have to deal with. But it seems to me that by educating people around the fact that I think what, at least for now, the analysis is saying is these programs are basically equivalent, but it's about the students that are streaming into the programs, and this is where we're seeing the differential. But it's really not a surprise when you think about this. We know that people are going to, without more information, the kind of information that I was seeking and that was lacking last year, I didn't have any really hard data to understand the differences in the programs and to understand more about the successes of the kids in both programs. So, no surprise, I, followed the sort of playground chatter, talked about it with my wife and made a decision that we felt was right for our child. But people follow in their socio-demographic patterns and paths. We know that. But if we are enriching people's knowledge of these programs, then they're going to make more educated choices about what's right for their kids. And I don't think you're necessarily going to see what you've been demonstrating here tonight, which is people making, if you give people more information, they might make some different choices. Maybe we would have chosen English. Certainly we were quite influenced about the class size. That was a huge factor for us. And yet we didn't really know enough about how this looked over time. And so I'd say sort of in summary that I think there's more that the committee and the community can do to kind of educate us all on what exactly we're dealing with here than to step into something that almost is sort of irreversible. I don't think you necessarily have to move into this cap or no cap. I think you can take time over the next few years to try to produce a bit of a culture change here in the way that people are coming to this decision, because everybody's taking it very seriously. And we can, in the meantime, we can also collect more data, analyze more data, and that will help everybody. And so I'd really urge you to think about that as opposed to what seems to be on the table right now, which is this idea that capping is the solution. What's the rush? Really, what is the rush? We can manage this over the next few years and see if we can, through education, literally, figuratively, change the way people are thinking about this, and people will feel as though they made the most informed decision. And then we'll look at the data and say, do we still have a problem? Thank you.
Just to say, we didn't hire Dr. O'Dwyer.
She volunteered.
This was a volunteer effort on her part, which makes it even more, makes it even more impressive. Next, we have Stephanie Hartwell.
Stephanie Hartwell. I live at 9 Hartwell Street. And I just wanted to ask a question about thinking about the recommendation about siblings. I'm shocked that this hasn't come up. We felt very, very lucky to live in Milton. We feel very lucky with our experience in the public school systems. And we love having a neighborhood school. We have a walking school bus when the weather's nice, and it's just fantastic to be able to walk to school. And one of the things, that was one of our goals as parents, is to have a neighborhood school. One of our important goals for our children is that our children be in the same program. And our children are close in age. And we were lucky to have the choice for our oldest child to go into French. And I was one of those parents that there's a great language opportunity when you're thinking about French to go tour a school. And this might have been a sign to me that maybe this was incoming going to be problematic for the school system. For that tour, there were only 5 parents there that day. And, where is everybody? Has everybody already made a decision about what program they're going in? But at that tour and collecting the data, and then my husband comes from a bilingual family, we put together the data for our oldest child, who she's an interesting cat, and we had to sort of figure things out. But the program has been very successful for her. But now we're in the unlucky position that our second child's entering kindergarten. We're a small family, close-knit family. The girls are really close. We read together in bed. She watches my older child try to do her homework. And so language acquisition and siblings, there's a tremendous amount of data on that. And siblings that are in the same programs do better in schools. So I just wanted to pose the question, in thinking about the recommendations, that you do consider siblings. I know people have said, don't consider siblings. Like, how? You got to consider the siblings in this. And the thought processes and the decisions that move forward. And so thank you very much for the time. We do feel very lucky with the experiences we've had, and, a little bad luck, we'll be able to handle it. Do consider the siblings. Thank you.
Terrence McNeil.
I am Terrence McNeil from 21 Coolidge Road in Milton. I just wanted to speak a little bit about an issue that's been coming up a lot today, which is, a lot of people who have feelings on either side of this issue have talked about how families choose and families make decisions. And I think that's the important part to focus on here, because a cap is introducing the one instance in which families can't choose. Their choice is to enter the lottery. English parents won't need to do that, only French parents will. I'm fortunate, my 3 children are not yet school age, but that's why I'm here. My twin daughters are 4, so I'm concerned too about the sibling issue, I'll get back to that. And my son's 2.5. And I think, as many families in this community have done, that choice may be different for each child. But I moved here because French is an option, and I thought I would have the option to choose it, and I think that's what everybody wants. And by capping French, we're creating a zero-sum game for just that program. We're not operating 2 systems anymore. We're just operating one that people have access to, the English system, and the other one where they may or may not, and they have no idea if they'll be able to do that when they make the biggest decision, or one of the largest decisions, and certainly the largest investment of their life, which is where to move. Financially, hopefully buying a house, and personally, and where you're going to send your children to elementary school. Many of us move here for that purpose, because we want our children to go to the same elementary school, often a neighborhood school, for many years together. We don't want to have to switch schools. Some of us did that growing up and don't want to do that, and everyone knows it's hard. So I guess I just wanted to focus mostly on the idea of leaving choice there for parents, and secondly, to sort of seize on another theme from tonight, which is not making a decision too quickly. I think this has been incredibly helpful. Like Kate Murphy said, I've learned a ton today. My kids are not yet school age, as I said, so I'm not fully versed in the school committee, and I appreciate now more than ever the hard work that you all do for all of us, and particularly with Professor O'Dwyer volunteering her time, and I heard she's a parent, all the more impressive that she found time to do that. I've learned a ton, but I've also learned there's a lot of data out there, as you all knew, but making a decision this year, even for a cap for the following year, to me seems hasty. And while I appreciate a timeline, everyone here wants to know what the timing would be so that we can make decisions as to where to send our children. After being here tonight, I think a quick, expedited deadline like the one we talked about may frankly be too quick. Take one example that just came up, which is the idea of looking out for siblings and how the lottery would work. Based on what was discussed earlier tonight, a decision could be made in September to cap the program, and then the cap itself would need to be implemented while the administration is busy with everything else they do running our schools, addressing how that cap would work, district by school by school, district by district. You know, how are siblings going to be addressed? What if they already have one in? Oh, can we put people from on the border over to this school? How are you going to decide all that in a time? I have faith in you guys, but how are you going to decide all that in time for us to make a decision as to where to go to kindergarten? So I just ask you to consider that, and also another theme. Beverly Ross spoke earlier about two issues that I think are very important. One, she has two African-American male sons, and that gap needs to be addressed regardless of how French immersion's there, but it's part of the discussion. And two, a way to address this French immersion discussion also is looking at programs such as the one she suggested, the International Baccalaureate Program, and other programs that will make English more appealing to everyone. And what she left out, but I know because our kids are at the center school together, is she also is from the BC School of Education, so take her up on that opportunity to volunteer. Thanks very much.
Thank you. The last person I have on my list for tonight is Vivian Simon.
I'm good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
My name is Karen McCarthy. I speak very quickly. I live on 27 Thompson Lane, and I want to address what Kristen said. My biggest issue, and no one has mentioned it, is the divide, and we talk about the divide between the parents and French and English, and now it's coming to our children. And 3 times this summer already, someone has asked my daughter, "Are you French or English?" And I thought, what? Her name is Fiona. She's going to 2nd grade. Like, why do we ask that question? They're kids. So I think it's a really big issue that is now going down to our kids. They're all listening to every one of us talk, and they're seeing it in the paper, and it's a horrible feeling to be asked that. I really think it's a big issue. And so one of the things I want to talk about is that how do we get them to mix up, okay? And so including the gender, including the different French and English, including the whole entire grade. So what about what you kind of said is having the 2 specials the same. French, you know, they have music and art. They're both in English language. Take French class A and English class A and take half and half, and they go to music together, and the other half go to gym together. So they're still the same teachers, they're still the same class, but they mix it up. And so at least they're not French and English, but they're Sally and they're Joe and they're every other person's name, because I can't stand anymore about are you French or English. I think we have taken it, and now our kids are hearing it, and now it's a really big problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
I know I already spoke, but can I speak for just 2 more minutes?
It's 10:30.
How many people, if we open this up, how many more people would like to speak? Chuck is it.
Question. After what we heard tonight, and if there's no cap, what do you think parents are going to choose? I feel exactly the opposite. I don't know what you're waiting for. I think parents have given you, and the data's given you, what you need to do. You need to emphasize the English program, the carrot, and you need to put the cap in, the stick. And I'm an average person, but I figured out a long time ago that the French program is for white people who aren't poor, who don't have IEPs. And everyone else figured that out too, and that's what's going on. So I'm surprised. I thought some of the questions were frankly bizarre after the presentation. So I'm surprised there's not concern for legal liability after the data that we saw. Maybe I misinterpreted the data, but what I saw was a concentration of low-income minorities and IEP children in the English program. Self-selected, but now we know officially, and I think that has to be changed. So I think the cap is the way to start, and then emphasizing the benefits of the English program, and I think hopefully things will turn around. But there's really no reason to wait. You should vote as soon as possible. Thanks.
All right.
Can we speak and say now that we want to know, think more about it?
Thank you all. Now back to the rest of our agenda.
briefly, and I know the hour is late. First, I'd like to announce that we heard today that Cunningham third grade teacher Tanya Walsh was nominated, as we nominate teachers across our district, for state and national recognition. And Tanya is one of the 3 finalists in the state for the Presidential Award for Excellence in Elementary Mathematics. Those names. Tanya is a third grade English teacher at the Cunningham. She'll be recognized next spring at the State House. Her application will go to the White House, and teachers from across the country will compete against one another. So that is very, very exciting news tonight for the Milton Public Schools. Also for the Cunningham, Jonathan Redden has been appointed the principal of the Cunningham School. At our next meeting, we're going to bring our administrators. Jonathan Redden will be communicating with all of the parents at the Cunningham and all of the teachers. We're very excited about his appointment. At the same time, we've also appointed Courtney Walsh. Courtney is going to be the Milton High School Math and Business Department Head, filling the position vacated by Michelle Cruza, who will now be one of Milton High School's vice principals. We still have our opening for elementary world language and social studies director, and we're working on that appointment. I had on the agenda the STEM program. The STEM program is an initiative, interdisciplinary, across the school, the grade levels and across the disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and math. And we're looking to implement that program next year in our English first grades. Marilyn Decker is away on, as I told school committee members, an island in the Pacific for the next 2 weeks. She'll be back by our next meeting, and Holly Concanon, Marilyn Decker, John Phelan, and I will make a presentation on our plans district-wide to implement that pilot and that program this coming school year. And I'll hold my other happenings and include them in an email blast this week. Thank you.
All right. My report, I will also try to make it quite brief. We have a couple versions of the school committee calendar for the upcoming year have circulated. If you have any suggested changes to it, in the short run, we have meetings scheduled for the 8th and the 15th of August. The 15th, we might choose to be our retreat meeting where we talk about our goals for the year. My plan is at least to have that meeting as our retreat, because we shouldn't go any later than that if we're going to set goals for the year, rather than August 15th. We had originally scheduled for the 22nd, but Ms. Sheridan had suggested that we move it to the 15th, so we avoid the beginning of school and the work the administration has to do on that. And if that's a problem for people, let me know.
Quick question.
Yes.
Are we staying with Wednesday nights for the year? It doesn't matter to me, but we talked about it.
Since we were on Wednesday nights, it's just,
Okay. I just know
no
it was
one
discussed,
seemed
and I don't remember
interested
if we
in
changed it.
changing one way or the other.
Okay.
We actually, our school committee policy says it's Tuesday nights, so we might have to, the policy subcommittee might have to look
Okay,
at that.
but it's Wednesday nights.
But
Okay.
We're
That's fine.
scheduled for Wednesday nights. So I'll have to just ask you to take a look at that and see if there's any additions you need to make to it. You've also been sent out a list of, from last year, of the various different subcommittees. I need you to let me know if there are things you would like to change. Obviously, Mr. Kahane is not on this anymore, so we have to add some folks around. And if people want to move from a committee that they're on, please let me know, so we'll handle all those appointments at our next meeting.
I'm not on the policy, so I shouldn't.
And
be
neither
on
is
it.
Mary
I'm
Kelly.
not either.
Yeah, well,
And can I also say, if people are interested in stepping down from one of these committees, it would be helpful for the rest of us to know that, so that we'd know where there'd be an opening. So if they're just communicating with you, Glenn, that would be a challenge. So if anybody looks at this right now and knows, oh, I don't want to be in that committee anymore, and I'm interested in changing, we should probably say that.
Yeah, I need to step down from the Foundation for Education.
Okay.
That way I can put that into my calendar.
Anyone else?
Okay, so we need someone for the foundation. There is also, the one that is not on here is the Master Planning Committee, which the town's master plan, which was approved at town meeting last spring. As I told a couple, I'm willing to serve on that, but if someone else wants to do it, that's fine too. So, if you're interested in the Master Plan Committee, let me know.
I nominate you, Mr. Pavlicek.
I sent out the charge to the committee as well in the email, so on those, just please look them over, please get back to me, we'll do a formal appointment at our next meeting. The new school committee orientation packet, that was an item Mr. Walker had given an outline of.
It's coming along slowly. I found out that we don't have the internal capacity to produce an org chart, but the superintendent and I are working toward remedying that. So we still have a ways to go.
Finance Subcommittee, Ms. Kelly.
The FY 12-13 HRS non-union salaries, do we have a document on that?
Mr. Gillis, that wasn't in your packets?
I don't have it in the packet that I
You
got.
vote out vote out the vote from executive session.
Right, in executive session, we had voted to adjust the non-union salary by 2.25. These are for people, 2.25%. These are for people who are not in any bargaining unit, and sort of tracks the bargaining unit adjustments for the teachers. That was voted in executive session. At this meeting, we just need to report out that in fact did happen.
So we don't need to re-vote it?
No, it just needs to be reported out that at the
Reporting out.
executive session, that was voted to increase these are the secretaries and various people who don't lie within any bargaining unit.
Mr.
But they're
Chair.
non-administrative. We have not yet set administrative salaries.
Can we check whether we need to take a public vote once we take a vote in executive session? I looked at the open meeting law briefing, and I believe we need to take a public vote, but can you check that?
I will check. It's usually, I've read it as being reported out, but you can check to see whether it requires a formal vote or not. Not a problem. Extension, Ms. Kelly, on the MPEG lease.
Yes. I'm not exactly sure why it's under Finance Subcommittee, but I think we've been asked by the MPEG board to extend the lease, and that's the only modification to the president's lease that's being asked for. It's an extension of the contract through December 31st, 2017. And this will help MPEG with their financing, I believe, or something to do with their financing,
Right.
so.
And we followed up for you, and that can just be signed by the chair.
Right, I appreciate that. Thank you.
So I think we need a motion to authorize the chair to sign.
Jesus, I'm sorry.
Authorize this, if MPEG doesn't
Just wanna
blow
wake
up on us.
Waking everybody up here.
Authorize the chair to sign a lease extension with MPEG.
Yes.
So move.
Well, it's moved by Ms. Keller from the Finance Subcommittee, since it's under their reports. Ms.
second
Shardikin,
it.
second. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, all those in favor? That's unanimous, thank you. Anything else from Finance Subcommittee?
Yeah.
We added the item of Policy Subcommittee, Mr. Walker.
So we're back with social networking. The good news is that substantively, the content for this policy has not changed since you last saw it 2 months ago, but I have highlighted what we did in response to the request from the union. We had several discussions with the union, and they asked for a couple of things. One was to move earlier in the policy an acknowledgement that there may be certain instances where we've talked about prohibitions, or we talk about prohibitions later, that there might be some instances where teachers, coaches might need to use cell phones, so we've articulated what those situations are. Field trip situation, instance where there's a school-sponsored event and someone needs to be contacted, summer AP courses. So we tried to articulate, based on the input from the union, what some of those exceptions might be, and they're happy about that. But that's basically the only change. there's some other smaller ones where they said, well, we may need to access the internet in order to access a calendar on Google, and we said, yes, that's true. So what you see here is highlighted in bold type and italics are the changes we made based on those discussions with the union. But for the most part, we simply moved things around. And as I said, they cited several instances where there would be exceptions, and we acknowledged that that was the case and incorporated those. But you'll see that substantively it's the same policy.
So this is our second reading, so this is...
Third reading.
Third reading, all right, well, at least second.
Right.
We usually vote at the second, so you're, on behalf of the policy subcommittee, you're moving adoption of the social networking policy?
I am.
And
I apologize. Was this in the packet that was sent out?
No, it wasn't.
Okay. I guess I would request that we have an opportunity to just read this before we're asked to vote on it. I think that's...
I think you've read it multiple times.
If you're saying to me that the verbiage that takes up most of the second page of this document is added new, is that what we're saying?
I'm saying that we moved some part of the policy from the back to the front because they said, rather than talk about prohibitions first,
Okay.
let's talk about instances where there are exceptions. So we moved that to the front.
Okay.
And they cited several examples, field trips, coaches contacting team captains, and summer AP advisors who might need to use cell phones to contact students, and you see those listed there. Other than that, the policy is the same.
Just as a matter of policy, I think it might be beneficial to have read this before. That's all I'm saying. I will vote against this policy just on that premise.
Thank you very much.
But if you would like to move it, go right ahead.
So moved.
is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Bagley-Jones. Any further discussion on the social networking policy?
Looks good.
Thank you.
All those in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? So you're abstaining? So that is 4-1-1. Just under policy subcommittee, you did, the policy subcommittee has received the MASC with their suggested changes, and we're going to have to go through that.
Right.
We began that work today, and it will continue.
And there's the Michael's Law that we have to do by...
September 1st.
September 1st, so that's one of our next couple meetings, that we're going to have to adopt a policy on those. So that's upcoming. Old business, citizen speak, topic response. Yes.
I think at the last meeting, that's when Ms. Bradshaw spoke. I think the importance of us fixing the situation for this grade, and I know the administration is working hard on it, is exemplified by the passion that was in her voice and the concern for her child's education. And I know that we're doing all that we can, but I think we even need to be even more creative, because this is truly an issue for some students in the English program. So I appreciate her coming forward and expressing as in detail as she did her personal story.
Anything else under citizen speak responses? The other item, we added the RFP for council.
So I sent around by email draft RFP. I got a couple of looks fine, and didn't hear from any of the rest of you.
I didn't see it either, sorry.
Okay.
So I responded, but I wasn't sure where that came, because I wasn't at that
We
meeting.
discussed it in executive session. So for those of you who haven't seen it, please check your Milton PS email and give me some comments as quickly as possible, because we're planning to send that out.
Will do.
Please,
Thank you.
actually might help to just shoot it around one more time.
No, I'm not going to do that.
Well, I don't remember seeing it. I'm usually pretty good at this.
Oh, I feel
All
much
right.
better. I do too.
All right, anything else under old business? Next meeting agenda items, I mentioned the policy, anything else there for upcoming meetings other than the obvious?
Can we clarify the committee report, committee assignments too. I think
Yes,
that
we
would be
need to
important.
clarify committee assignments at our next meeting.
So if people send you drafts, then we'll.
I will accumulate and try to put it together.
Okay.
The hour is late. The executive session on contract negotiation, is that,
What was that?
that sounds to me like we might be able to live without it tonight.
Yes, I think so. I provided a draft of what I thought we should use as a format for planning for collective bargaining and presenting collective bargaining proposals, but I think that was accepted. Do we need to, well...
What I will do is I will look at that. I will put an executive session on next time. I will, just so you know, I have accumulated and amassed all the unvoted executive session minutes, which I'll get out to you. And at our next meeting, we're going to have an executive session one way or another, if for nothing else but to vote minutes, and to release minutes that can be released over the last couple of years, because we need to do that periodically as well. So just trying to clean that up, get it all off our plate.
Great.
So we will have an executive session next time for at least that, but we won't have one tonight. That being the case, I would entertain motions to adjourn.
So moved.
I hear unanimous vote.
Yes.
Aye, that was a meeting.
I will sign it.